Chapter 2795. Ji Xinhua didn't quite understand what had happened to him, but seeing him sitting there perfectly fine, she inexplicably wanted to cry. At the same time, she heaved a sigh of relief. Thank God he was fine. Otherwise, she really didn't know how guilty she would be. It was impossible to breathe while meditating underwater. Ji Xinhua was afraid that he would drown, so she half supported and half carried him to the surface. Fortunately, the water was not deep at this time. She carried him and popped her head out quickly, and with great effort, she carried him to the shore. Originally, she could have done it with a light leap, but now she was sweating profusely from exhaustion. When she placed Rongyue Tianlan on the shore, she was almost paralyzed from exhaustion, and her vision turned black. She gasped for breath for a while before she recovered. She wiped the sweat on her forehead and said, Rongyue Tianlan, how did you fall into the water? You actually flew so far, and made me flip over the turf over there. Rongyue Tianlan sat there quietly beside her with his eyes slightly closed, like a Buddha. To be able to sit there so peacefully, he should be fine, right? And although she was the one who fished him out of the water, his whole body was dry, without a trace of water. Obviously, he had set up a protective enchantment when he was meditating in the water. If he could set up an enchantment, then how serious could his injuries be? Ji Xinhua looked at him worriedly again. There were no wounds on his body, and his ink-black hair draped over his shoulders, not a single strand out of place. His blue robe was like water ripples, and his whole body was dry. He was neat as if he had just returned from a banquet, and there was not a trace of embarrassment on him. On the other hand, she was originally covered in blood and mud, but after being tossed around in the water, the blood and mud were gone, but her whole body was dripping wet, and her clothes and hair were all sticking to her body. She was like a drowned rat, and couldn't be more embarrassed. In comparison, she looked more like someone had fished her out of the water. Ji Xinhua sighed in her heart that the exalted immortal was indeed an exalted immortal. She moved to his side and looked at his expression and posture. Her expression suddenly changed. His posture had not changed, and even when she dragged him out of the water, he was still in the same position. She paused for a moment, then reached out with her finger and tested it under his nose. Her fingertips trembled slightly. She raised her hand to hold his wrist and felt his pulse. A moment later, her face was even paler than his. He had no breath, no heartbeat, no pulse, and even his arms were cold. He was dead. What was sitting there was actually a corpse. Ji Xinhua's heart felt as if it had been struck by someone, the pain spread to her limbs and bones, and her head was buzzing. He was dead. How could someone like him die? How could an ascendant immortal die so easily? Her face was pale as she busied herself around him. She used all the first aid methods she knew on him, but there was no improvement at all. Ji Xinhua became more and more panicked. Although this person had caused her a lot of harm, he had saved her several times over the past few days. In the Misty Mountains, he had always protected her. This was the first time she had tasted the feeling of being protected like a little girl. But now, this person was dead. His death was so strange. He actually loved you very much. Ji Xinhua's mind suddenly recalled the words Rong Shiho had said before he died. At that time, the situation was too dangerous, so she didn't pay attention to those words. But now, they suddenly appeared in her mind. Chapter 2796. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone. She stared at him, who was sitting there, in a daze. He loved her. Was that possible? Didn't he like her little sister? How could he like her? If he really liked her, why would he come to Misty Mountain with her and take such a huge risk to break off the engagement? She believed that if he really loved her, he would definitely not break off the engagement. If he didn't want to break off the engagement, her father, the South Heaven Emperor, would naturally not want to break off the engagement. Even if she wanted to break off the engagement, he wouldn't have cooperated. There wouldn't be such a scene here. But if he didn't love her, why would he risk his life to save her? In that situation, he was completely acting instinctively. He instinctively used his life to protect her. Could it be that he was still feeling guilty? But according to legend, this person liked to owe people favors. He wasn't someone who would feel guilty after owing someone a favor, but it was hard to say. After all, this person had been wandering outside for so many years. His personality might have suddenly changed. She thought about it, and all kinds of thoughts came one after another. Her chest seemed to be hiding a pot of boiling water, rolling over and over. She suddenly shook her head. Now was not the time to think about this. She looked at him, who was sitting quietly with his eyes closed. Other than the lack of breath, he looked like he was sleeping. He didn't look like a dead person at all. She didn't give up and circled around him again. She touched his nose and his chest again. Her heart was so flustered that it didn't seem like her own. She couldn't calm down no matter what. She didn't believe that he was dead. She wanted him to take another breath. His life was only a single breath away. She desperately thought about all kinds of first aid methods. Suddenly, a light flashed in her mind. She suddenly thought of a way. She pounced on Rong Tianlan, who was sitting there, and pushed him to the ground. Then, she began to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She wasn't familiar with it. When she pressed on his chest, the strength was not right. Even when she forced open his mouth to pass air into his mouth, her lips knocked against his teeth. When Rong Tianlan woke up, he saw this scene when he opened his eyes. A girl who was drenched from head to toe was half lying on top of him. Her pretty face was pale, and her face was serious. Her eyes were wide open, and her slightly cold lips were pressed against his, blowing air into his mouth with all her might. Her breath was like an orchid, blowing into his mouth, causing his heart to skip a few beats the moment he woke up. He widened his eyes and looked at her without any reaction. On the other hand, she was a little dizzy from continuously blowing air into him. When she started to give him air, her lips touched his for the first time. She was still a little nervous, and her lips were still trembling. But later on, she had been busy saving people and had completely forgotten that the person under her body was a man. She only had the thought of helping him regain his breath. Although she wanted him to wake up, she didn't expect him to wake up at this time. At that time, her lips were still pressed against his, and the two of them just stared at each other for a while, neither of them reacting. Rong Tianlan was restraining herself from reacting, while Ji Xinyu had forgotten to react in hindsight. After a while, Rong Tianlan, who was under her, moved. Her eyes blinked slightly, and her head tilted slightly to the side, their lips parted, and her soft lips brushed past his cheek. She seemed to wake up from a dream and suddenly raised her head. She raised her head too quickly, and she was a little dizzy. Chapter 2797. She lifted her head too quickly and felt a little dizzy. This action almost made her roll away from his body and land beside him. In her nervousness, she asked a stupid question, "You're awake?" She was clearly saving someone, but she looked like she had done something bad and was caught red-handed. A blush crept up her cheeks. Rong Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly, as deep as a pool of water. It stayed on her face for a moment, then quickly moved away. He slowly propped himself up and tried to sit up, but he was a little weak and fell back down weakly. Ji Xinyu was quick to react. Almost without thinking, she stretched out her arms and hugged him from behind. He fell into her arms, but this posture was a little intimate. The redness on Ji Xinyue's face that had just faded seemed to spread again, but she forced herself to be calm. She quickly straightened him up and teased him, "When did you become so weak?" You're still an immortal. She said these teasing words to ease the inexplicable tension in her heart and the slightly ambiguous atmosphere between the two of them. She thought that with Rongyue Tianlan's usual temperament, he might take advantage of the situation to lie on her and say, "I've always been this weak, it's not like you've never known. Come, straighten me up," or something that deserved a beating. But she obviously thought too much. After Rongyue Tianlan sat down, he actually cupped his hands and bowed to her. "Thank you, princess." He was very polite and courteous, just like his usual elegant self. Ji Xinyue's heart sank inexplicably. The smile that had just appeared on her lips froze on her face. She paused for a moment before replying, "You're welcome." Her tone was a little dry. "A thank you, and a you're welcome." It invisibly widened the distance between them. Ji Xinyue didn't understand him. Ever since she knew him, his attitude towards her had always been a little strange. There was seriousness in his sloppiness, and he had always been very concerned about her. Especially after entering this mountain, he was always concerned about her and protecting her. Although sometimes he was a little rude, his concern for her was not fake. It was also because of his attitude that she was able to quickly close the distance between them. She went from being wary and annoyed of him at the beginning to speaking with him in a familiar and unrestrained manner. She didn't know when he had occupied a position in her heart that wasn't too big or too small. Just as she was wondering what this position was, he suddenly became cold. Did he lose his memory? Or did he take the wrong medicine? Do you remember what happened just now? Ji Xinyu decided to probe. Rong Yuetian closed her eyes slightly and didn't look at her. "I remember. We killed Rong Shiho. He didn't lose his memory." Ji Xinyu let out a sigh of relief. "Then, do you remember what happened after you killed him?" Rongyue Tianlan opened her eyes and looked at her. The bottom of her eyes was calm. "You don't have to ask. I didn't lose my memory. Before Rong Shiho died, he risked everything and wanted to drag us down with him. He used the soul-splitting technique and almost turned the world upside down." His gaze finally fell on her body again. Her body was still wet, and her pink dress was full of spots of blood. "You're injured again." Ji Xinyu did not care about her injuries. She still had a lot of questions she wanted to know. "You clearly rolled around with me in your arms to protect me. How come after the explosion, I stayed at the bottom of the pit, but you ran so far away and fell into this lake?" Rong Yuetian sighed. "I wasn't blown here, but my body was originally here." Chapter 2798. Rongyu Ishanlin sighed. "I wasn't blown here, but my body was originally here. The one who fought with Rong Shiho was my nascent soul, not my real body. The explosion was too fierce, and I couldn't bear it for a while, so my nascent soul disappeared. Just now, it was successfully condensed, so it returned to its original body and woke up." Soul detachment technique. He actually knew the legendary soul detachment technique. No wonder he could use his spiritual force without any scruples when fighting with Rong Shiho. It turned out that he was also a soul. It wasn't strange for a person's soul to detach occasionally, but after the soul left the body, it couldn't do anything. At most, it could peep. However, Rongyu Ishanlin's soul could fight like a real body, which was unprecedentedly powerful. Based on what he said, it was his soul that protected her in the critical moment. The reason why he could wake up was not because she gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but because he automatically gathered his soul. Ji Xinyue didn't know what to feel. Her eyes couldn't help but look at him. "Just now. Thank you." If it wasn't for his soul protecting her, she was afraid that she would have been blown to pieces. At this time, she didn't know where the wandering soul was floating. "Also, thank you for giving her the opportunity to kill Rong Shiho for revenge." Rongyu Ishanlin lowered his eyes. This time, he finally smiled. You don't have to be polite with me. After all, I owe you for coming to Misty Mountain. Besides, in that situation, even if it wasn't you, but someone else, I would have saved them. Ji Xinyue's heart, which was still beating fast in her chest, slowly calmed down. Looking at him, she slowly repeated, You owe me. Even if it wasn't you, I would have saved them. He was a mighty immortal, so it wasn't strange that he had great love and compassion. Ji Xinyue's heart, which was still beating fast in her chest, slowly calmed down. Looking at him, she asked, What do you owe me? Rongyu Ishanlin didn't open his eyes to look at her. After all, I delayed you for more than 3,000 years and caused you to suffer so much. So you've always wanted to compensate me, right? Ji Xinyue interrupted him and answered on his behalf. Yes, Ji Xinyue's face paled slightly, but she smiled, as expected of someone who cultivated to become a heavenly immortal. You don't want to owe anyone anything. Actually, I've already said that this marriage can't be entirely blamed on you. I don't have any other good points, but I'm magnanimous, so I don't care about this anymore. Therefore, you can keep your guilt to yourself in the future. I don't care either. Rong Yuetian was speechless. He paused and spoke again in a faint voice, I will try my best not to feel guilty. Oh right, you don't have to take Rong Shiho's last words to heart. He didn't know anything at all. What did he say in the end? Didn't he explode with a bang in the end? Ji Xinyu interrupted him and stood up, You rest first, I'll go over there and take a look. She turned around and was about to leave. Your injury. Rongyu Ishanlin couldn't help but open her mouth. Her gaze was fixed on her dress that was gradually stained with blood. The dark clouds were still rolling overhead, and the world was dark, but he could clearly see the bloodstains on her dress. It was so glaring. Ji Xinyue didn't answer. Her voice was faint, It's just a small injury, I won't die. She turned around and strode away. Rongyu Ishanlin was obviously seriously injured. Although he had woken up, his forehead was covered in cold sweat, and even the tip of his nose was dripping with cold sweat. Chapter 2799. Just now, he was still able to sit when he was out of breath, but now that he had regained his breath, he sat unsteadily. He finally fell down again, looking up at the rolling dark clouds in the sky, his fingers slowly clenched, and he closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Xinyu. Only now do I know that I have other emotional debts. In my previous life, I let her down and let her die with hatred. In this life, I won't let her down again. But I'm destined to let you down. He finally regained his memories. That's not right, these memories shouldn't belong to him completely, but to a part of his soul. Originally, when a battle's soul reincarnated, it shouldn't have any memories when it returned to its original body, and he shouldn't have regained this memory. But perhaps that feeling was too deep, too heart-wrenching, and actually left a faint impression in his mind. For example, there was the figure of the girl in pink in his mind, there was her hazy appearance, and there was even a dance. Even if it was just a figure, he didn't really care about it. He only faintly felt that the girl in his mind should be his destined lover. Especially when Shinjiuli told him that his Red Luan Star movement, he subconsciously felt that if he really did have Red Luan Star movement, perhaps he would meet that girl, fall in love, get to know her, and finally travel the three realms hand in hand like Shinjiuli and Ningxiuemo. When he first saw Ji Tianyue, the girl's image in his mind suddenly became clear, and highly overlapped with Ji Tianyue. Especially her expression, actions, and personality were even more similar. He thought that the heavens were not unkind to him, that he found the girl in his dreams so quickly, it couldn't be any smoother. He thought that he would naturally fall in love with the girl in his dreams, but he didn't expect that when he interacted with this girl, his heart wouldn't be stirred at all. He looked at her as if he was looking at an ignorant and naive child, and couldn't find any feelings of affection. He repeatedly pondered in his heart for a long time, and felt that the reason why he didn't have any feelings for Ji Tianyue was probably because he didn't like father-daughter relationships. If he had other thoughts about an underage girl, maybe it would be wretched. He felt that he would fall in love with her in the future. After all, she was the girl in his dreams. But he didn't know when it started, but his gaze was uncontrollably attracted to Ji Xinyu, and his thoughts couldn't help but revolve around her. Whenever he saw her chatting and laughing with other men, he would be very unhappy. When he saw her sad, he couldn't help but want to comfort her. When he saw her happy, he would be as bright as the sun. When he saw her hurt, he wanted to kill the person who hurt her. He had always thought that he felt guilty towards this girl. However, during these few days of adventure in the Misty Mountain, he gradually understood that it was not the case. When he was trapped by the Snake Beauty transformed into the person he cared about the most in the depths of his heart, Ji Xinyu. The Snake Beauty that was pestering him was much more powerful than the one that was pestering Ji Xinyu. Her human form was exactly the same as Ji Xinyu's, and she even hid her snake tail. When she pounced on his body and pestered him, he could even smell the unique fragrance on her body. Because they were too similar, even though he had sensed that something was wrong, he couldn't do it. In his life, he had killed countless demons and devils. As long as he could see through the other party's disguise, he had never shown mercy. He had encountered a heart image snake before, and that heart image snake had even transformed into his good friend Yunqi's appearance to seduce him. He didn't say anything and killed it with a single sword strike, without even blinking an eye. Chapter 2800. And this time, even though he knew that the other party was an illusory demon, he could not do anything to that face. It was also because of this that he fought with the heart image snake for so long, until the heart image snake's physical strength was exhausted and it finally revealed its true form. Only then did he strangle it to death without any hesitation. The fight with the heart image snake had exhausted a lot of his physical strength, and there were many wounds on his body. However, he could not care less and immediately rushed to find Ji Xinyu, because he knew that the heart image snake would not appear. Once it appeared, it would easily form a pair and attack two people separately. His guess was right, Ji Xinyu was indeed entangled by the heart image snake. If he wanted to save her from the heart image snake, he could not act rashly. Because the heart image snake entangled not only the human body, but also the soul. If he acted blindly, not only would he not be able to save her, he would also hurt her soul, and it might even cause her soul to scatter. If he wanted to save her unharmed, he could only use the flute to melt the ice around her body and stimulate the snake to return to its original form. And this flute sound was not an ordinary flute sound, it had to be played with a special blowing method. And this special blowing method required psychokinesis. Left with no choice, he could only use the soul shell shedding technique, using his soul to blow this special flute sound. As expected, he had succeeded. The ice on her body melted. She no longer allowed the snake to do whatever it wanted. She sliced the snake open while it was still alive. The snake even looked like him. She did not hesitate at all when she made her move. At that time, he did not know what to feel when he saw it. Although he was very gratified that she was not mesmerized by the heart image snake's illusion, that clean cut of her blade made him shiver. Using the soul detachment technique in Misty Mountain required more than half of his strength, and he was also injured. The soul detachment technique and the flute sound made his injuries worse, and he could not even use his light body technique. Of course, it was not that he could not use it. If he worked hard, he could still walk normally. However, when he saw Ji Xinyu cleanly cut him in half, he felt a little uncomfortable, and could not help but want to find some trouble for her so that she could take him away. This girl was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. When he was a little weak, her maternal instincts immediately flared up, and she took good care of him. He felt that his wounded soul was slightly comforted. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what kind of feelings he had for her, but subconsciously, he didn't want to go their separate ways after breaking off the engagement. So, he wanted to take her in as a disciple, but he didn't expect her to be so loyal to her master. He even felt that she liked her master. This feeling made him very unhappy. Before he could think of a way to deal with it, she had already discovered the yuan bead. This led to a series of unforeseen events later on. Ji Xinyu, Rongyue Tianlan, Rongyue Tianlan. This person was known as the #1 person in the Fanning continent 13,000 years ago. Although his appearance was not very good, his evil techniques were top-notch. In the past, he was a person who could do whatever he wanted in the Fanning continent. His excellent bone structure and mind made him extremely proud, but his dwarf body and ordinary appearance made him feel extremely inferior. His extreme arrogance and inferiority complex made him violent and cold, and the way he did things was a little confusing. It was unknown how many people had died at his hands back then. Perhaps it was a sin, but Rong Shiho took a fancy to a famous beautiful fairy in Xinyu Tianhen 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 Tianhen. Chapter 2801. Unfortunately, the beautiful fairy was not interested in him, and he couldn't win her heart no matter how hard he tried. In a fit of anger, he used forceful means to snatch the woman in his hands, forcefully possessing her. Then, he used thunderous means to force the patriarch of the beauty's family, making the patriarch have no choice but to agree to his marriage proposal. The arm could not resist the thigh, and the beauty married him just like that. Although the beauty had married him, she had always been depressed. He had thought of 10,000 ways to make her happy, but to no avail. Later, in a fit of anger, he neglected the beauty and threw her into a remote courtyard, ignoring her. He, on the other hand, was indulging himself in wine and women, sleeping in the willows, living a happy life. He thought that since she married him, she would treat him as her sky no matter what and not always give him a cold shoulder. He probably thought that by ignoring her for a while, she would change her mind and truly fall into his arms. But the end result was that his wife ran away with someone else in the courtyard. When he found out, he was naturally furious. He tried every means to find the escaping pair of mandarin ducks and recognized that the one who made him a cuckold was her senior brother. Her lover's martial arts were average, but his appearance was very good. He was a real handsome guy. When the two of them were discovered, she seemed to have thrown caution to the wind and refused to admit defeat. She said that she had always liked her senior martial brother, and that Rong Shiho had used force to break them apart. Now that she and her senior martial brother were together, he could kill her, but he couldn't bring her back. Rong Shiho probably really loved his wife, so he didn't do anything to her. Instead, he looked directly at his wife's lover. That lover didn't have a backbone. After being coldly stared at by him, he immediately cowered. He took the initiative to kneel and beg for mercy, saying that he was just confused for a moment and didn't want to elope with his junior sister. It was his junior sister who threatened him with her life to take her away. Rong Shiho deliberately let that man make a fool of himself in front of him to make his wife give up. But he didn't expect that his wife looked at her lover for a long time as if she didn't know him. Suddenly, she smiled and raised her hand to commit suicide. Rong Shiho naturally wouldn't allow her to die. He saved her and then slapped her lover's face in front of her. He thought that his wife would change her mind after seeing her lover's ugly behavior, but he didn't expect that she would really want to die and use all kinds of suicide methods. Rong Shiho was tired of dealing with her. In the end, he finally relented and said that he could divorce her, but he had to go to Misty Mountain to break off the engagement. Later on, he and his wife went to the Misty Mountain, but neither of them came out. No one knew what Rong Shiho and his wife had gone through in the Misty Mountain that made them lose their lives. After Rong Shiho died, he turned into a vengeful spirit. He probably thought that his wife didn't like him because he was too ugly, so after he became a vengeful spirit, he began to devour vengeful spirits and kill other people who entered the mountain. When he met someone with a handsome face, he would remove their facial skin and melt the most beautiful part of them onto his own face. As a result, over the years, he had become a handsome man who had been assembled. He was completely different from his previous appearance. Rong Tianlan had only heard of him. When she first saw him, she really didn't recognize him. Rong Tianlan was only certain of his identity when he used his perverted skills on Ji Xinyu. If they were outside and this person was still alive, he would not be Rong Tianlan's opponent. Chapter 2802. But this was Mishti Mountain. Not only could Rong Tianlan not use his telekinesis, but he was also injured. He had no chance of winning against an abnormal person like Rong Shiho. And he couldn't just watch Ji Xinyu be humiliated, so he used the soul detachment technique again. The soul detachment technique was a forbidden technique that could only be used once a year. It would cause irreversible damage to the body. And this time, he had to use it for the second time in a day. Originally, when he used the soul detachment technique, he could leave a part of his soul behind to guard his body and not be disturbed. But this time, because he had to use his soul to fight a fierce battle, he could only leave all of his soul. In this way, his body was no different from an ordinary person's body and couldn't be damaged at all. So when Rong Tianlan left his soul for the second time, he put his body in a lake far away from the battlefield to avoid being discovered by Rong Shiho. This battle was extremely difficult. Although Rong Tianlan used the soul detachment technique many times, he didn't use it in a face-to-face fight. So he wasn't very proficient in it and wasn't as handy as his body. And the opponent was a vengeful spirit who was a top master when he was alive and had cultivated for more than 10,000 years after his death. So even if Rong Tianlan's martial arts were much higher than Rong Shiho's in the real world, he still needed to use some methods and spend a lot of effort to win this battle. Fortunately, they won in the end. But he didn't expect Rong Shiho to use such an abnormal method of self-destruction before he died. In order to protect Ji Xinyu, Rong Tianlan's soul was injured by the explosion and couldn't return to his body for a long time. When he finally returned, the battle soul had become his main soul, probably due to his other souls being heavily injured. The battle soul's memories that had been suppressed in the clouds rushed into his mind. Ji Yu, Jun Luyi, Yi Qianshang, memories surged in his mind like a torrent, making him unable to react for a while. The guilt, heartache, and despair of the past seemed to have happened yesterday. Ji Yu's appearance was unprecedentedly clear. She was exactly the same as Ji Tianyu, and there was only one word difference between their names. Even their temperaments were similar. Smart, beautiful, innocent, and made people want to protect her well. Of course, Ji Tianyu had probably seen a lot of palace dramas, so she was more scheming than Ji Yu back then. She would also use some methods to make him feel unfamiliar. But overall, Ji Tianyu and Ji Yu were very similar. If there was no accident, Ji Tianyu should be the reincarnation of Ji Yu. In her previous life, he had let her down and let her die in his arms with hatred. In this life, he had found her again. How could he let her down again? He originally wanted to properly sort out his feelings for Ji Xinyu, but after recovering this memory, he couldn't think about it anymore. Just take it as him feeling guilty towards her. It was impossible for them to have any further development. Fortunately, she didn't seem to have fallen in love with him. She still had so many friends by her side, and she still had her master. One less person shouldn't be a big deal to her. He directly smothered this unclear feeling of his to death in the bud. He was right to do so. He told himself. Towards things that shouldn't happen, feelings that don't belong to you should be cut off cleanly. They couldn't be sloppy. That would be the best for both of them. He did a good job and was very successful. Chapter 2803. Originally, Ji Xinyu had already treated him like a friend, even throwing herself into his arms and performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in order to save him. After he came back to life, her eyes were as bright as the stars. There was true joy and happiness. But he couldn't seem to treat her as a normal friend, so he could only treat her coldly and alienate her. But she was sensitive and smart, she must have noticed his coldness and alienation. Her starry eyes dimmed, and she turned to leave. He lay there, watching her figure gradually disappear. His heart felt like it was weighed down by a weight, heavy and painful. For a moment, he wanted to call her back, or at least give her a bottle of spirit medicine to apply on her wounds. However, his rationality stopped him. Since there was no fate, he should let go. The more contact they had, the more entanglement they would have. It was disadvantageous for both of them. He closed his eyes slightly. He should get up and meditate at this time, but he didn't have any strength. It was as if there was a fire burning in his heart. He didn't want to move for a while. His injuries were too severe. He felt a little dazed as he lay there, and the faint pain in his heart made him feel dry. There seemed to be some movement beside his ear. He suddenly opened his eyes, looking at her who had returned. His heart skipped a beat. Ji Xinyu was holding 4 rolled-up straw mats in her hands, looking down at him. Do you want to get up and meditate to recover? Rong Tianlan paused for a moment, then nodded. For a moment, he didn't understand the function of the straw mats in her hands. Ji Xinyu seemed to be too lazy to explain to him, and directly spread out a straw mat on the ground, then said lightly, "The ground is cold, it's not good for your recovery, sit here and meditate." As she spoke, she helped him sit on the straw mat. Afraid that he would be too weak to sit, she also put 3 more straw mats on his back, left arm and right arm. The straw mats were obviously made recently. They still had a very light fragrance of plants, seeping into the heart. Rong Tianlan sat on the 3 straw mats. It was very stable. He looked at the straw mats beside him, then looked at her. His voice was slightly cold. You just made them? Actually, you don't have to spend so much effort. I just need to rest for a while and I can meditate anywhere. Ji Xinyu was busying herself around him. When she heard his words, she paused for a moment. It's not that troublesome. It's just a few straw mats. The materials are all readily available. After a pause, she smiled and said, You don't have to take it to heart. After all, you became like this because you wanted to save me. What's more, you've taken care of me a lot along the way, so I should do something for you. He paused for a moment before continuing. If it were someone else like you, I would have done the same. So you don't have to feel like you owe me a favor. The sooner you recover from your injuries, the sooner we can break off this engagement. These words were said beautifully and appropriately. Rong Tianlan couldn't say a word. After Ji Xinyu finished, she clapped her hands and turned to leave. He couldn't help but ask, Your injuries? I've already bandaged it. And I've also used Qilin resin, so it'll heal very quickly. Ji Xinyu's tone was relaxed, so you should also quickly get better. I don't want to stay in this damned place any longer. She strode away again, and he didn't know where she was going. Rong Tianlan looked at her back for a moment, then finally closed his eyes and began to meditate. Chapter 2804. Although there were mountains, rivers, and trees in the scroll of the universe, it wasn't very big. The explosion just now had affected the entire environment. The forest was gone, and the small mountain was turned into a small hill full of rubble. Ji Xinyu forced herself to walk to the lee of the hill, and finally couldn't take it anymore. She staggered and sat down on a rock. Her body was in great pain, and her hands and feet were weak, so she just lay down on the rock. The dark clouds in the sky were still rolling, as if a storm was brewing. Ever since the explosion, the sky here looked like it was the end of the world, and it was no longer as bright as when she first came in. She opened her eyes wide and looked at the dark clouds, as if there was something on them that attracted her. Maybe it was because she had opened her eyes for a long time, but her eyes seemed to be misty and sore. She seemed to be tired, and simply covered her eyes with her hand. After a while, she moved her hand away and looked at her palm. There was a little water stain on her palm. She was startled, and wiped the water stain on her body. She hugged her knees for a moment, then suddenly laughed and shook her head. Ji Xinyu, you really thought too much. He was really good to you because of guilt, and not because this person was so particular about perfection. Even a handkerchief that he used to wipe sweat was exquisitely embroidered, without a single wrinkle on it. How could such a person really fall in love with her, who was covered in bruises and even made her hair stand on end when she saw it? He was a playboy, and taking care of women was his noble demeanor, but it had nothing to do with his true feelings. He often said some ambiguous words to her, but it was just a playboy's behavior, but it made her unconsciously think too much, and her heart that was as calm as an ancient well gradually became turbulent. However, he probably realized that he was about to go overboard, so he automatically stopped and became cold and distant towards her. At first, she was a little unaccustomed to it, but after sitting here for so long, she slowly got used to it. Fortunately, she hadn't fallen in yet. Fortunately, it was still not too late. Her emotional world was originally sealed in ice, but she didn't know when he had forcefully pushed open a crack. Because the sunlight would shine in, but it turned out that it was all an illusion. The door to her heart closed again. She smiled. There was nothing wrong with this. She didn't have to worry about the messy emotions that she had been feeling lately. His swift and decisive action was well executed. He was free, and so was she. She thought that the reason why she was a little moved was probably because it was the first time in her life that someone had pampered her like a little girl. After finishing her apprenticeship, she had many companions every time she went out for adventures, but those companions were not as good as her. When they were in danger, she had always been their backbone, their pillar of support. She had always been the one saving them and taking care of them. She was disguised as a man, and those people treated her as their life and death brother, as their boss. When he was with Romeo at Tianlan, he always treated her as a real girl and took good care of her. He even flirted with her a little. This made her feel very new and warm, so she was a little moved. She didn't know who said that the stronger a girl was, the softer her heart was. Sometimes she would want to find a shoulder to lean on, and sometimes she would want someone to pamper her like a little girl, and Romeo at Tianlan happened to do this, prying open her heart that had been frozen for a long time. But now she understood what he was thinking. Chapter 28:05. But now she understood what he was thinking. He didn't have that kind of feeling towards her, she was just overthinking it. Then why should she be conflicted? Make life difficult for herself? She could live a carefree life on her own. It would be foolish to be conflicted over a relationship that didn't belong to her. She didn't want to be such a fool. She would just treat him as a normal friend in the future. She took a light breath, rubbed her eyes, and sat up. Only then did she start to truly heal herself. She had suffered quite a few injuries this time, but fortunately they were all superficial wounds. She applied some medicine on the lighter wounds, cleaned the deeper wounds, applied some medicine, and bandaged them. Everything would be fine. There was one wound that was especially deep, on the side of her waist. It was a bit scary with its mouth open. It wasn't convenient for her to bandage this place, so she finally took out the chelin resin. It wasn't easy to get the chelin resin, and it was such a small piece. If she really applied it to all the wounds, she would probably use it all up this time. Ji Xinyu was often injured, so this thing was extremely precious to her. She naturally couldn't bear to use it all, so she only used it on places where it was inconvenient to bandage and where the wounds were deep. If not treated, it would be life-threatening. Even if she used it sparingly, she still used up more than half of it this time. Carefully putting away the rest, she looked at the sky, which was even darker than before. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rumbled across the horizon. It was going to rain. Ji Xinyu jumped up. She jumped too quickly, and a light crack came from her broken leg. The pain was piercing to the heart. She frowned and stood in place, waiting for the pain to pass. The heavy rain came as it pleased, and after a few rumbles of thunder, the rain started to fall. This place was flat, and there wasn't even a place to hide from the rain. Fortunately, Ji Xinyu always brought everything with her, so she naturally brought an umbrella with her. She opened the umbrella and leaned against a large rock, acting as a barrier. The rain grew heavier, forming a curtain under the umbrella. Ji Xinyu took shelter from the rain for a while, then suddenly thought of something, and her expression changed. She took out an oil paper umbrella from her storage space, and braved the wind and rain to run towards the lake. No matter what, this person had saved her several times. She couldn't watch him get drowned by the rain when he was in trouble. After circling around a small hill, she finally saw him sitting by the lake from afar. Then, she slowly stopped in her tracks. The rain by the lake was even heavier, but Rongyu Yishinlin, who was meditating there, was not drenched by the rain. Above his head was a huge umbrella that Ji Xinyu had never seen before. The umbrella was painted with an ink landscape, and the surface of the umbrella was as big as a small pavilion. It protected Rongyu Tian tightly, and not a single drop of rain could get in. This person was indeed living the most exquisite life. Even an umbrella could be so unique. Ji Xinyu smiled and turned to leave. However, Rongyu Tianlan seemed to have sensed something. She raised her head and looked over, only to see her leaving figure. The rain was pouring down around her. She held a plain and clean 64-page umbrella and walked away. Her hair was very long, almost reaching her ankles. It swayed gently in the rain like a curtain. This time, she had changed into a black outfit with black hair. Only the hand holding the umbrella was white. Her back was like an ink figure drawn by a famous artist, and she gradually disappeared into the distance. Rongyu Yishinlin's eyes flickered slightly. She raised her finger slightly, as if wanting to call out to her. Chapter 2806. Rongyu Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly. He raised his finger slightly, as if he wanted to call her, but he put it down halfway and closed his eyes to meditate again. He had always meditated very quickly, but this time, probably because of his serious injuries, he was restless. It rained heavily for an entire day. After a day, it finally cleared up. The mountains and rivers in the scroll of the universe could not be judged by common sense. It actually had the ability to restore. After a day and night of heavy rain, the woods, hills, lakes, miraculously returned to their original appearance. Even the big crater created by the explosion disappeared. Everything seemed to have returned to its original state, but where were the people? They could not return. Both their moods had changed. Rongyu Tianlan's injuries were the most serious. A few days ago, he could not move at all. He would pant after taking a few steps. There was another problem with the scroll of the universe. Every evening, there would be a heavy rain, and it would last for an entire night. After an entire night, the rain would clear up. The two of them had to recover here. It was not good to be drenched in the rain every day. Therefore, after Ji Xinyu discovered the weather here, she built 2 small grass houses the next day. The grass houses were simple, but they were enough to shelter them from the wind and rain. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Rongyu Tianlan had just finished meditating. When he opened his eyes, he found Ji Shinhua standing in front of him. Ji Shinhua had been cultivating elsewhere for the past 2 days and had not come to his place. Now that he suddenly saw her, his heart could not help but skip a beat. Ji Shinhua did not wait for him to speak. She simply asked him, "Can you walk on your own now?" Rongyue Tianlan slowly got up. After meditating for 2 days, his body had finally recovered a little. Although he could not use lightness skills, he could still walk a few steps. He nodded. "I can walk. Do you want to leave now?" She probably could not wait. After all, she had been delayed for 3 days, but with his current injuries, it would be difficult for him to walk to the pillar of marriage alive. Ji Shinhua turned and walked away. "Follow me." Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. Although he did not know what she wanted to do, he still followed her. After a while, he finally saw the 2 grass houses. He was stunned. This place has a heavy rain every evening. You can take shelter from the rain in that house. Ji Shinhua pointed to the house on the left. Rong Yuetian's heart trembled. "You cultivated it?" Ji Shinhua raised her eyebrows. "Of course, don't tell me it can jump out on its own." She raised her head and looked at the sky. Dark clouds gathered in the sky again. A heavy rain was coming. She didn't say anything else and went straight into the hut on the right. Rongyu Tianlan paused on the spot and slowly walked into the house on the left. The 2 straw houses were not close to each other, and there was even a forest between them. After he entered this straw house, he could not see the other one. The straw hut wasn't big, and there was only one room. It was as short as a latrine, and there was only a straw praying mat inside. Other than that, there was nothing else. Rongyu Tianlan had just sat on the praying mat when the heavy rain fell from the sky. The rain fell on the roof of the thatch above her head, making a rustling sound. This was the most simple and crude place that Rongyu Tianlan had ever lived in his entire life, but it was also the place that made his mind the most turbulent. He was an exalted immortal who had cultivated for thousands of years. When he walked in the wilderness, he would not mind even if it was hailstones the size of eggs, let alone rain, because he could easily conjure up a house. Chapter 2807. He was very particular about his life. Even the house he casually changed was complete with pavilions and terraces. It was pleasing to the eye like an ink painting. But now, he was living in a simple house that Ji Shinhua built with her own hands. It warmed his heart more than any other luxurious house. His heart was like the waves of the sea. Although the straw hut was small, it could prevent him from suffering from the wind and rain. He had already held an umbrella for 2 nights, but no matter how luxurious and exquisite the umbrella was, it could not compare to this small straw hut. It was raining heavily outside, but he was not in the mood to meditate. He simply stood up and walked around the house. The main frame of this straw hut was built with the trees in the forest. The wood was very rough, but very sturdy. No matter how strong the wind and rain were, it would not collapse. He walked to the door and looked into the distance. However, he could only see the rain and the lush forest on the opposite side. Other than that, he could not see anything else. What was she doing in that house now? Seeing that she was walking very nimbly, her leg injury must have really healed, she actually knew how to build a house. A girl was trained to be more capable than a man. Such a girl could survive no matter what kind of harsh environment she lived in. She did not need anyone to take care of her. Seeing her like this, he should be gratified, but his heart felt as if it had been pierced by a thin needle. There was a slight pain. He shook his head. He could not think about it anymore. If he continued to think about it, he was afraid that he would fall into a quagmire. He went back to meditate again. When the sky cleared up the next day, Rongyu Tianlan did not meditate anymore and walked out. Unknowingly, he walked near Ji Xinyu's house and saw that she was practicing behind the house. Behind her house was a small forest. She was practicing her lightness skill and hidden weapons in this forest. She was dressed in black and her movements were as nimble as a dancing butterfly. Countless leaves were shot out by her like hidden weapons, nailing the surrounding trees and shaking them. This was a girl who lived and worked hard. She might not know it herself, but she was like a luminous body, always attracting people's attention. Rongyu Tianlan simply leaned against a tree and watched her practice. Swoosh! A green light shot towards his face. Rongyu Tian was stunned. Just as she was about to dodge, another green light flashed and caught up with the first light shadow. The two light shadows collided in the air. The first light shadow was a branch, while the second light shadow was a leaf. After the two light shadows collided, they immediately shattered into powder and fell to the ground. The powder was very close to Rongyu Tianlan, and some of it directly pounced on his robe and stained his sleeves. Rongyu Tianlan flicked his sleeves and raised his head to see Ji Xinyu standing in front of him. She frowned slightly and sized him up. "What are you doing here?" The moment the words left his mouth, he probably felt that his tone was a little harsh. He rubbed his forehead in annoyance and changed to a softer tone. "Your Highness Rongyu, have your injuries healed?" She had started to call him His Highness Rongyu again. She had clearly started to call him by his name earlier. Rongyu Tian looked at her. "Xinyu, thank you." He thanked her again. Ji Xinyu couldn't help but rub her forehead. "What are you thanking me for this time?" "That wooden house is very good." Ji Xinyu waved her hand. "It was built simply and can barely block the wind and rain. You did so much for me before and got injured because of me. This is my compensation to you, Rongyu Jun. You don't have to take it to heart." Chapter 2808. She sized him up again and said with concern, "Rongyu Jun, I think it's better for you to quickly recuperate. The sooner you recover, the sooner we can go out. If you need anything in the next few days, just let me know. I'll help you as long as I can." She had regained her chivalrous appearance, cheerful and generous, forthright and loyal. She was no longer angry and coquettish like a little girl. Perhaps it was because she had just finished practicing martial arts, but her pretty face was flushed and her eyes were sparkling. There were even beads of sweat on her fair forehead. This kind of her made people want to hug her. Rongyu Yishinlan suddenly looked away, nodded, and turned to leave. This person specially came over to thank her. He was really polite. The son of a noble family had a good temperament, better than his cousin. Rongyu Dianhuan often ate and drank from her. When they went on adventures together, she had no choice but to take care of him several times, but she didn't get any thanks from him. Rongyu Yishinlan was injured because of her this time. It was reasonable for her to take care of him at this time. She didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Even if other friends were in the same situation, she would do the same. If it was Rongyu Dianhuan, she would probably be more tired. Because that boy had always been problematic and troublesome, she wanted to beat him up. The two of them rested in the world of the Scroll of the Universe for a total of 10 days. On the morning of the 10th day, Rongyu Yishinlan walked out of the small house and saw Ji Xinyu standing not far away. In these 10 days, the two of them rarely met. Under normal circumstances, they were cultivating in their own places. Ji Xinyu never took the initiative to look for him. It was rare to see her take the initiative. Rongyu Yishinlan felt his heart skip a beat. He took 2 steps forward and asked, "Xinyu, are you looking for me?" Ji Xinyu looked at him and paused for a moment. She finally said her purpose, "Rongyu Jun, I see that you look good. You should be almost done recuperating, right? If you're almost done, shouldn't we go out? The sooner we finish this, the sooner we can leave Misty Mountain." I still have things to do, I really can't delay any longer. So she came to urge him to go out. Rollercoasters felt that his brain must not be online today, because he casually asked a rather brainless question, "Are you in such a hurry to go out to see your master?" Ji Xinyue stared blankly for a moment, but didn't try to hide it. "I have to return before master's birthday." She couldn't make it in time for her master's exit ceremony, but she had to make it in time for his birthday. This master of hers was very particular about celebrating birthdays. Every time it was a birthday celebration, he would make sure that everyone was present. All of his disciples had to be present. If any of them dared not to go, getting a head full of bruises was considered a light punishment. Counting the days, there were still 5 days until her master's birthday. Even if she went out now, she would need to ride a fast horse to get there. Furthermore, she had not finished her business yet. She did not know what kind of problems the marriage pillar would give her. She might have to delay it for another 2 days. If they didn't leave now, it would really be too late. Rollercoasters paused for a moment, then turned around and left. Ji Xinyue didn't know what he was planning, so she followed him closely. "I think you should have no problem with normal movement techniques now. How about this? When we get out, I'll be in charge of clearing the path. You just need to follow behind me. If the pillar of marriage gives us a problem, I'll help you solve it." Chapter 2809. Rollercoasters suddenly stopped, and Ji Xinyue almost rushed into his arms. She hurriedly took 2 steps back and looked up at him. "Even this won't work." Rollercoasters turned and walked away again. Ji Xinyue was anxious. "Rollercoasters, what do you want? Are you afraid that you won't be able to walk out after the marriage agreement is broken?" "Don't worry about this, I've always helped people to the end. I'll still protect you down the mountain." Rollercoasters didn't stop walking. Ji Xinyue simply flashed and blocked his way. "Can't you at least say something? How could it not work?" This way, he would take advantage of her. Rollercoasters, who had taken advantage of her, didn't look too good. He faintly spat out a few words. "We're now walking out of this map of the universe." Ji Xinyue was speechless. She finally breathed a sigh of relief and looked around. "So you know how to get out of this map?" These few days, she had actually been studying and turning over every inch of land here, but still couldn't find a way out. She didn't expect Rollercoasters to know this. The 2 of them walked to the lake again. The lake had returned to its original depth, and at this moment, it was sparkling under the sunlight. Rollercoasters stretched out his hand to her. "Give me your hand." Ji Xinyue paused for a moment. "You can just lead the way." She didn't want to have any physical contact with him now. Rollercoasters looked at her. "Haven't you always been indifferent to the difference between men and women? Why are you suddenly so particular now?" Ji Xinyue raised her eyebrows. "I've always been particular, okay?" Even when she was dressed as a man, she tried not to have any physical contact with others, unless the other party was injured and had no choice. Rollercoasters didn't want to argue with her about this topic anymore, so he went straight to the point. "If you want to get out of this map of the universe, you have to lead one by one. And the person who opened it has to lead the way." He was the one who opened it when they came in, so naturally, he had to lead the way out. Ji Xinyue was skeptical, but there was no better way now. She made up her mind and put her small hand in his palm. "Let's go." Her small hand was not as soft as other women's. There were many calluses on her palm. Rollercoasters held her hand and touched the calluses on her palm. His eyes deepened slightly. "When you go out, there will be a whirlpool. You will feel a little dizzy. You can close your eyes. You can also..." He swallowed the rest of his words. She could also hide in his arms. He couldn't bring himself to say those words. In fact, the whirlpool when they left was even bigger than when they entered, and it spun even faster and crazier. However, Ji Xinyu kept her eyes open the entire time. She only tried her best to maintain her balance in the whirlpool, not screaming, nor did she have any intention of hiding in his embrace. Fortunately, he managed to grab hold of her in time so that they wouldn't be separated and she wouldn't be trapped in the scroll of the universe forever. It was unknown whether it was because of the explosion in the map of the universe or because it could only allow one person to enter once, but after the two of them exited the map of the universe shattered into dust. This made Ji Xinyue's heart ache for a while, and she felt that she had let down the three Qi brothers. The wraiths outside had long disappeared. Ji Xinyue landed on a mountain ridge, and she felt like she had been reborn. Perhaps it was because there were too many obstacles along the way, but the rest of their journey was very smooth. Chapter 28:10. Perhaps it was because there were too many obstacles along the way, but the rest of their journey was very smooth. They met a few small evil beasts along the way, but Ji Xinyue took care of them with a few punches and kicks. At noon, the two of them climbed over a mountain and finally saw the legendary Pillar of Marriage. It was an irregular boulder that pierced through the clouds, hidden in a cloud of white fog. Occasionally, when the wind blew, it would reveal part of its figure. There seemed to be countless names flashing on the boulder, but if one looked closely, they would not be able to see them clearly. Ji Xinyue raised her head and looked at the boulder, then took a deep breath. The boulder stood in the distance, and the top could not be seen. Looking at it from this direction, there seemed to be a boundless pressure that made people hold their breaths. That was the Pillar of Marriage. They only needed to follow the instructions of the two masters guarding Misty Mountain and imprint their blood on the Pillar of Marriage. Then, the Pillar of Marriage would naturally have a problem. As long as they could solve this problem, everything would be fine. This marriage had been entangled with her for more than 3,000 years, and now it was finally time to be free. She no longer had to bear this marriage that did not belong to her. Her heart seemed to be boiling, making her forget her fatigue. She turned in disgust with Rongyu Ishinlin. Let's use light body technique to get there. We might be able to get everything done before nightfall. Rongyu Ishinlin looked at the Pillar of Marriage, then looked at her sparkling eyes. His fingers tightened slightly, and he nodded, all right. Both of their light body techniques were excellent. Once they started flying, they were like shooting stars catching up with the moon. Rongyu Ishinlin's light body technique was much better than Ji Xinyue's, but at this moment, for some reason, he was slightly behind. Unlike Ji Xinyue's impatience, the closer they got to the Pillar of Marriage, the more uneasy his heart became. It felt as if he was walking on an irreversible path of no return. He took a deep breath. He did not do anything wrong. His figure rose, and he overtook Ji Xinyue. His blue robe was like a flowing cloud as he rushed towards the mountain. Ji Xinyue looked at his back from behind, and raised her eyebrows slightly. The exalted immortal was probably anxious as well, for there was a rare aura of hostility emanating from his body. From time to time, the animals that appeared in the forest to attack them were all killed by him, and were sent flying with a wave of his sleeve. Those who were smashed to pieces, and those who were thrown to their deaths. His appearance was as if he was possessed by the god of death, and the ferocious beasts along the way no longer dared to come forward. When they saw him rushing over, they hurriedly fled. Rather than calling the Pillar of Marriage a pillar, it would be more accurate to call it a straight white jade mountain peak. Ji Xinyue stood under the pillar and raised her head to look at it. She couldn't help but praise the magnificence of this pillar in her heart. She glanced at Rongyu Ishinlin who was standing beside her. Perhaps it was because he had run too fast, but his face was slightly pale. At this moment, he was staring at the pillar without moving. Shall we begin? Ji Xinyu spoke first, pulling out a crescent-shaped blade. This was also given to them by the two emissaries at the foot of the mountain. They could only use this knife to draw blood. All right. Rong Yuetian seemed to have woken up from a dream. He responded and took out his scimitar. Both of them cut their palms, and then pressed their bleeding palms onto the pillar of marriage. After a moment, the pillar of marriage shook slightly. The originally hazy words on it spun wildly, and slowly, two names appeared on the pillar. Rongyu Ishinlin, Ji Xinyue. Chapter 28:11. Rongyu Ishinlin, Ji Xinyue. These two names were pure gold, shining brightly side by side. In the middle of the names, there was a symbol of a heart-linking lock, as if they were a loving couple standing side by side. As the blood of the two merged, another line of words appeared under the names. 1,000 years of cultivation led to crossing the same boat, 10,000 years of cultivation led to sleeping on the same pillow. Do the two of you want to break up this hard-won good karma? In front of the two of them, the words yes and no appeared respectively. They could choose. Ji Xinyue didn't hesitate and pressed his bloody finger on the yes button. Rongyu Ishinlin's face was slightly pale, his finger pressed on the pillar for a long time without pressing it. Ji Xinyue glanced at him. What's wrong? Hurry up and press it. Both of them had to choose yes before the palm could be moved and the bleeding stopped. What was the meaning of him being distracted at this time? Rongyu Ishinlin took a deep breath, raised his finger, and pressed the yes button. A faint sigh came from the marriage pillar, but it was very vague, not much different from the sound of the mountain wind blowing. Ji Xinyue didn't hear it at all, but Rongyu Ishinlin's body stiffened slightly. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound. But he didn't see anything. According to the experience of the seniors who had successfully annulled their marriages here, after this process was completed, the marriage pillar would give the two people an extremely difficult question. They could either kill a monster, break through a maze, or enter an illusion. These difficult questions varied according to the level of the person who entered. The higher the level of the martial arts, the more perverted the challenge. Once the challenge was successful, the engagement would naturally be broken. If the challenge failed, sorry, but leave your life. Whoever failed would have to leave their life here, and the other party would be free. Of course, in the difficult problem of breaking off the engagement, one party could also help the other, but if they failed, the two of them would die here. Every senior who talked about the challenges here had a lingering fear. They didn't want to experience it a second time in their lives. Rongyu Ishinlin had already asked around, but he felt that there was no challenge that could really stump him. Martial arts, wisdom, zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, array formation, medical skills, planting trees and raising beasts, he was the best in all of them. According to him, except for the fact that he didn't know how to give birth, he was an expert in everything else. He even knew a little about witchcraft. Under such circumstances, what else could stop him? He even made up his mind to help Ji Xinyu as soon as he succeeded. He did want to break off the engagement with her, but he never wanted her to die. He had made all the preparations, but the marriage pillar gave him a reaction that he had never expected. As he pressed the word yes, the heart-linking lock that connected the names of the two people on the pillar of marriage broke silently. Then, he watched as the two names flew in opposite directions and disappeared into the pillar. This was the sign of a successful annulment. Rong Yuetian stood there, unable to react for a moment. He succeeded just like that. The marriage pillar didn't give them any problems, and simply annulled their marriage contract so crudely. It was too smooth. It went so smoothly that no one dared to believe it was real. After pressing yes, Ji Xinyue took a step back and patiently waited for the pillar of marriage to give her a difficult question. At this moment, when he saw the scene, he was also stunned. He blinked his eyes and said, "This is a sign of success, right?" You're not coming up with any more questions. Chapter 28:12. Rongyue Tianlan also took a step back, looked up at the marriage pillar, and answered Ji Xinyue, probably. So good. Ji Xinyue's eyes curved, and her small mouth curled up. Looks like we're lucky to have encountered such a rare opportunity. She paused again. Looks like we're really not meant to be. Even the marriage pillar didn't think highly of us, so it could be resolved so easily. Rongyue Tianlan choked, the joy in her eyes made him a little uncomfortable. He turned his eyes and looked at the marriage pillar again. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. The marriage pillar returned to its original appearance, and his and her names could no longer be seen. And the only connection between them was completely broken. As the two names disappeared, the fog in Misty Mountain also dissipated. Ji Xinyue felt a warm flow into her body. She moved her arms and legs. Hey, my telekinesis has recovered. Yes, the marriage between her and him had already disappeared, so the taboo of the Misty Mountain had also disappeared. This was the real sign of the successful dissolution of the marriage. Rongyue Jun, I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. Goodbye. Ji Xinyue was eager to return home. She cupped her fists at Rongyue Tianlan, turned around, and wanted to fly away. Rongyue Tianlan was quick to react, and pulled her back. Wait. Ha. Ji Xinyue raised her eyebrows. Is there anything else, Rongyue Jun? Rongyue Tianlan took a deep breath. You can't use your telekinesis yet, I'll send you out. Without waiting for Ji Xinyue to object, he grabbed her by the waist and flew down the mountain at lightning speed. Ji Xinyue was speechless. Ji Xinyue naturally knew what he meant by, can't use telekinesis yet, and struggled in his arms. My injuries are almost healed, don't worry so much. Rongyue Tianlan's arms were like iron hoops, and she couldn't move. His tone was also light. You just need to be careful for 3 more days. Do you really want that fish scale to be with you forever? The faint plum fragrance on his body made Ji Xinyue feel annoyed for no reason. She and he were not even engaged anymore, so how could they continue to hug each other like this? Besides, there were many new wounds on her body. Even if the scars on the old wounds disappeared, the new wounds would still leave scars. It was unnecessary for her to care about this. It's just fish scales. It's not a big deal. It wasn't like he would die. I don't mind. Ji Xinyue tried to reason with him. You may not care, but I do. This sentence almost slipped out of her mouth. Rongyue Tian pursed her lips slightly and said faintly, girls should cherish themselves. This way, others will cherish you. Don't worry, I will only send you to the foot of the mountain. I will only let you down when we leave the mountain gate. Rongyue Tianlan, I don't want to owe you anything anymore. Ji Xinyue was a little angry, she raised her hand and wanted to slap him away. Rongyue Tianlan's sleeve brushed against her body, causing Ji Xinyue's body to stiffen slightly. Damn it, she couldn't move. Ji Xinyue glared at him and opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ever since she finished her apprenticeship, this was the first time she was restrained like this. It was also the first time someone restrained her so frequently that she couldn't move. I owe you. Rongyue Tianlan's voice was faint. Let me help you one last time. One last time, all right. Ji Xinyue pursed her lips and froze in his arms. The Supreme Immortal's thinking was indeed different from normal people. She felt that she didn't understand him anymore. Chapter 28:13. Forget it. Since she was already here, she might as well take things as they came. This was probably the last time she would meet him, so she didn't need to care so much about it. Her waist was slender and soft. Wrapped around his arm, it was as if the size was just right and they fit perfectly. Ji Xinyu tried to raise her body as high as possible to prevent her chest from touching him. Rongyu Tianlan naturally noticed her small movements, but when she leaned back like this, her chest was even more perky. As long as he lowered his eyes, he would be able to see the small mounds under her clothes. Rong Yuetian's mind was shaken, her lower abdomen heated up, and her eyes suddenly moved away. He cursed in his heart. For the first time in his life, he felt desire. The environment in which Rongyue Tianlan grew up was also a little special. He grew up in the palace, and what he saw the most were the palace fights between the women. They used all kinds of means, and such beautiful women would make their faces hideous in order to compete for favor and status. This caused him to have some psychological trauma towards women since he was young. He was born with a handsome face, and he was even more handsome when he was young. Anyone who saw her would want to hug her. Among them were his father's concubines, and there were even some who had designs on him. When he was young, he had been molested by a concubine. Although he had detected it in time and had not been successfully molested by the concubine, he had almost lost his reputation because of it. Because of this, he had a deeper shadow over women. He had the illusion that women were tigers, and he even had an instinctive disgust towards the matters between men and women. Later on, when he ventured out into the world, he got to know some other women. His impression of women changed slightly, but the shadow of his childhood was deeply ingrained and could not be removed in a short period of time. Then, there was this forced engagement incident. He was forced to leave his hometown. After wandering in the space-time turbulence for a while, he finally settled down in the Tian-Ci continent. He cultivated the Tao of Immortals, which purified his heart and abstinence of desires, and he was a little traumatized by women. Therefore, although he attracted the gazes of countless beauties when he walked through the three realms, he was able to walk through thousands of flowers without a single leaf touching him. Other than a few close female friends that he had made regardless of gender, he had never really been moved by any woman. Of course, she had never fallen in love with him. He had a wide range of interests, but he was not interested in the relationship between men and women. Later, he got to know Shinjuli, who had the least desire. Shinjuli often came to his island to eat and drink, and even occasionally enslaved him and made him run errands for him. However, Shinjuli still regarded him as a true friend. Intentionally or unintentionally, Shinjuli also taught him some martial arts, which benefited him a lot. The Almighty had many tricks up his sleeves. There was nothing he couldn't get. Rongyu Tianlan liked to refine treasures, so he lacked a lot of raw materials. As long as he asked the Great God would always think of a way to get it for him. Rongyu Tian had always thought that although he and the Great God had different temperaments, they were the same kind of people. They were immortals with the most celestial aura. She didn't expect that the Almighty would be so deeply in love with her that he was hovering between life and death. Although Rongyu Tianlan had never been in love before, he still understood women. He had also read a lot of love stories. He wasn't as pure as the auntie, so he could be the Great God's counselor in love. He gave him a lot of bad ideas. The Great God loved for 3 lifetimes, and then flew away with his wife. This made Rongyu Tianlan quite envious. Only then did he start to face his own problems. When he dreamed in the middle of the night, he even wondered if he would also get a soul-stirring romantic love. Chapter 28:14. He had high expectations for love, so even though he had met countless women, he had never been moved by any of them. Of course, he had never fallen in love. For cultivators like him, his self-control was extraordinarily strong, and he had almost never had any physical desires. But now, he was hugging Ji Xinyu, who had broken off the engagement. and he had an indescribable desire. He had the urge to kiss her fiercely. He already had someone in his heart. He had loved that person so much that he could die for her. Now, he had fallen in love with another person. If Shinjioli knew about this, he would definitely despise him. The Almighty loved someone for 3 lifetimes, and it had never changed. But he had changed after loving for 1 lifetime, and was attracted to another woman. How could he face Ji-yu, who had died tragically for him? Not to mention others, even he despised himself for being a scum. If Ning Xuemon knew about this, he reckoned that she would directly label him as a scumbag. Rong Yu Tianlong closed his eyes and took a deep breath to calm himself down. Ji Xinyu, who was in his arms, suddenly started to struggle. Even though her acupoints had been sealed, she did not struggle much, but he still sensed it. He glanced at her, only to see her hurriedly mouthing 2 words to him. Rong Yu Tianlong did not react for a moment. What? Ji Xinyu could not say it, and in a hurry, she turned her head to look in a direction. Rong Yu Tianlong also looked in that direction subconsciously. His expression changed. He was too distracted, and did not see that there was a big tree in front of him, and he was running straight towards it. He was flying very fast, and was less than a meter away from the tree. It was too late to dodge, but if he ran over like this, Ji Xinyu, who was in his arms, would be flattened. In this crisis, he had no time to think, and his body turned abruptly. Bang! With a loud sound, his back hit the big tree. The big tree could not withstand his thunderous impact, and with a crack, it snapped, and the upper half of the tree flew out. Rong Yu Tianlong also almost fell out. Fortunately, his martial arts were not bad, and after a few steps, he finally stabilized himself. Ji Xinyu's face was filled with a "Are you possessed by something? How can you bump into a tree while walking?" expression. Rong Yu Tianlong's back was burning. She knew that this hit was not light. However, this situation was too embarrassing. He did not want to explain, so he coughed and said, "My psychokinesis has just recovered. I'm still not used to it." He then looked down at her and asked subconsciously, "Are you okay? Did you hit anything?" Ji Xinyu. She had been protected in his arms just now and hadn't been touched at all. At most, she had only been shaken a little. Of course, she was fine, but wasn't he the one who was in trouble? He had used so much strength to crash into it. If it were an ordinary immortal, they would have been killed instantly. Ji Xinyu actually really wanted to see his back, but she was currently in his embrace and couldn't turn around to look at his back, so she could only give up. Fortunately, Rong Yu Tianlong took her flying again. This time, the flight was very stable, so Ji Xinyu did not take it to heart. When Ji Xinyu came out from the entrance of Misty Mountain, she paused when she saw the scene in the valley. There were rows of tents in the valley, big and small, with different specifications, sizes, and colors. Chapter 28:15. The most eye-catching ones were 3 of them. One was light pink with a soft pink color. It was obvious that it was the tent of a noble girl. There was also a sky blue tent inlaid with countless gems. It looked like it was inlaid with countless stars. It should be the tent of a king. There was also a snow-white tent in the middle. It was like a crane and a flock of chickens. There was a huge pearl on top of the tent that shone faintly in the night. However, before Ji Xinyu could see the layout of the valley clearly, she was surrounded. The first to rush up were the 3 Qi brothers. The moment Ji Xinyu popped her head out, the first thing she heard was them shouting, "Boss! Boss is out! It's the princess!" The shouting third young Master Qi was kicked by first young Master Qi. Second young Master Qi's eyes were almost brimming with tears. "I told you, the princess and the others would be fine. They were just delayed, now they're finally out." The 3 brothers' enthusiasm moved Ji Xinyu. she was about to say something. Shwa! Someone jumped down from the tree, pushing the three brothers to the side. It was Changbubai. Princess, are you hurt? Ji Xinyue shook her head. I'm fine, Xinyue. This king knew you would come out. This king didn't wait in vain. The sky blue tent's curtain was lifted. The western sky prince Shi Shuangqing walked over with a smile. Did you succeed? Ji Xinyue didn't expect that after so many days, they were still waiting here. Her heart was slightly warm, but she also had a headache. The three Qi brothers and Changbubai were fine, but this Shi Shuangqing obviously had some plans for her. Now he was looking at her with a smile, his eyes full of gratification and friendship. It made the veins on Ji Xinyue's forehead twitch. Sister. A pink-clothed figure rushed over and grabbed Ji Xinyue's sleeve. Sister, you're finally out. I was worried to death. You're a full 10 days later than the scheduled date. Did you encounter any danger? Annulling the marriage, did it go smoothly? Where's brother Rongyu? Why didn't he come out with you? Ji Tianyue fired a series of questions like a cannonball. Her big eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. She had lost a lot of weight in just over 10 days. She used to have a little baby fat, but with her slim chin, her eyes looked even bigger and more watery. Ji Xinyue calmly pulled back her sleeve. Rongyujun is in the back, he'll be out soon. You go wait for him. Pushing her aside, she walked out. The others naturally followed her and asked her a lot of questions. Ji Tianyue was left hanging there. Ji Tianyue stood in place, startled. Although she was a little embarrassed, she could tell from Ji Xinyue's words that the marriage had been successfully annulled. Brother Rongyu is free. Brother Rongyu was about to come out. Then she would be the first to welcome him and let him see her first. She waited directly at the entrance of the mountain without blinking. Ji Xinyue was anxious to see her master, so she casually answered a few questions from the people around her, then cupped her fists to them. Thank you for your concern, Xinyue can't thank you enough, but Xinyue has an urgent matter to attend to and needs to return to the Purple Clouds sect, so forgive Xinyue for taking her leave. After finishing his speech, he was about to fly up on his sword when he raised his head and saw the snow-white tent. He stopped abruptly and looked carefully at the appearance of the tent. He blurted out, Master. Chapter 28:16. This tent actually belonged to her master, sect leader Ziyun. The snow-white tent's curtain was lifted, and a man in a white robe walked out. He had handsome eyebrows and looked rather cold and aloof. Just by standing there, he had the aura of a great master. Behind him were 9 other disciples of Ziyun's sect. Although their appearances were different, from their expressions and bearing, they were all experts. When these people came out, it was as if an auspicious aura had spread throughout the valley. Ji Xinyue's eyes widened. After being stunned for a moment, she strode forward. Master, senior brother. Her master had actually brought all of her senior and junior brothers here. Not a single one was left out. This was too surprising. She immediately went forward to greet them. The man in the white robe was her master, sect leader Ziyun. He raised his hand and pulled his disciple in front of him. Come here, let me see if you're injured. Her master actually came to see her in person, which made Ji Xinyue feel flattered. Of course, she was also very happy. In order to reassure her master, she stood up and turned in a circle. Master, I'm fine. Look, I'm still as lively as ever. Her steps were light, and when she turned in a circle, her clothes fluttered as if she was about to fly. She really didn't look like she was injured. Her senior and junior brothers all laughed. Master, we said that your worries were unnecessary. With little junior sister's strong martial arts, a mere misty mountain won't be a problem for her. Yes, little junior sister is blessed by the heavens, nothing will happen to her. Senior sister's martial arts are top-notch. Even if this misty mountain is 100 times more dangerous, senior sister can still come and go as she pleases. Right, junior sister, after master came out of seclusion and heard that you hadn't come out yet, he rushed over without saying anything. If it wasn't for the rule that outsiders are not allowed to enter the mountain, I'm afraid that master would have rushed into the mountain to find you. These few days, master has been unable to sit still because of you. Ji Xinyu's senior brother Feng Wuji couldn't help but sigh. Little junior sister, why were you inside for so long? If master didn't see that your life was not in danger because your life was not in danger, I'm afraid that everyone would be worried to death. Because your life is unknown, master didn't even organize a birthday banquet. No matter where Grandmaster Ziyun went, he would always pay attention to his style. After he came out, he casually summoned a chair and sat on it. His disciples surrounded Ji Xinyu and talked to him one after another, but he didn't interrupt. He only rested his chin on his hand and looked coldly at this female disciple of his who was the most skilled in martial arts but also the most troublesome. His gaze made Ji Xinyu's hair stand. Master didn't want others to say that he was old, but he took his birthday very seriously. Every year, he would hold a grand celebration, but this time, because of her, although her master didn't say anything, the way he looked at her made her feel that there was a lot of resentment. Ji Xinyu immediately took out a blue pearl and handed it over with both hands. Master, look, this is your disciple's gift to you. Grandmaster Ziyun's eyes lit up slightly. He finally straightened his body and stretched out his hand to receive the pearl. He twirled it around his fingertips. The fate-revealing pearl shone brightly, blinding the eyes of the surrounding disciples. Everyone congratulated their master in unison. Feng Wuji couldn't help but pat Ji Xinyu's shoulder. Little junior sister, you really are capable. You even found such a treasure in the Misty Mountain just to cancel the engagement. Another disciple also laughed. Little junior sister, you didn't come out for so long, was it because of this pearl? Chapter 28:17. Ji Xinyue smiled and nodded. Although she had found this pearl by accident, the reason why she had been delayed was because of this pearl. Sister, why hasn't Brother Rongyue come out yet? Is he seriously injured? If you want to break off the engagement, why do you still need to pick the pearl? Ji Tianyue suddenly rushed over from the entrance of the valley, her face full of anxiety. Ji Xinyue frowned slightly and looked back at the entrance of the valley. Indeed, Rongyue Tianlan had not come out. Logically speaking, he should have come out. At that time, he carried her and flew near the entrance of the valley, then put her down, saying that he wanted to separate from her and let her go first. She thought that he was probably avoiding suspicion, so she didn't say much and came out first. She had been out for almost a quarter of an hour. Why hadn't he come out yet? Was he trying to avoid suspicion even more thoroughly? Ji Xinyue didn't want to pay attention to her sister, but Ji Tianyue was probably used to being spoiled by her. At this time, she was a little unforgiving. She tugged at her sleeve and opened her big round eyes. Sister, say something, why hasn't Brother Rongyue come out yet? Ji Xinyue frowned slightly. She was a little embarrassed for her sister to ask about her future brother-in-law in public. She was about to tug at her sleeve when her ninth junior brother Xia Fenglu suddenly smiled at Ji Tianyue and waved. Tianyue, come here. Xia Fenglu had an extremely likable baby face, smiling all day long. He looked like a good-tempered Maitreya Buddha, but unknowingly, he liked to trip people up. Jianghu people called him the Smiling Tiger. He had entered Nantian Palace with Ji Xinyue a few times and had seen Ji Tianyue a few times. He even played with her and gave her some fun things. Ji Tianyue was still not on guard against him, so she ran over. Brother Xia Fenglu raised his hand and rubbed her head to show his affection. Tianyue, you're also very worried about your brother Rongyue? Ji Tianyue nodded. Yes, very worried. Xia Fenglu blinked. Then if Brother Xia enters Misty Mountain, will little Tianyue also be very worried? Ji Tianyue paused for a moment and replied with some reluctance, I'm also worried. Xia Fenglu looked a little sad. The word also makes Brother Xia sad. Then in little Tianyu's heart, who is better, Brother Xia or Brother Rongyu? Which one do you prefer? Ji Tianyue choked. This, a good child shouldn't lie. Even if Brother Xia is sad, I hope you can tell me the truth, Xia Fenglu said sincerely. I like Brother Rongyu more. Ji Tianyue's voice trailed off. Then what do you like about Brother Rongyu? Speaking of this, Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. Brother Rongyu's martial arts is the best. Brother Rongyu is the most handsome. Brother Rongyu is the most popular, all the girls in the continent want to marry him. Then little Tianyu also wants to marry Brother Rongyu. Ji Tianyue blushed. I'm still young, so you're saying that little Tianyu doesn't want to marry Brother Rongyu? No. Little Tianyu also wants to marry Brother Rongyu. Little Tianyu already knows how to like people at such a young age. Come, tell Brother Xia, when did you start to like Brother Rongyu? Ji Tianyue tilted her head and thought for a moment. Her face turned red again. Since Brother Rongyu entered Nantian Palace, I liked him at first sight. Chapter 28:18. She was such an honest child. Xia Fenglu smiled and squinted his eyes. So you already liked him at that time. But at that time, he was still your brother-in-law. There's no such thing as sisters sharing a husband in the Fanine continent. So, you already wanted to steal a man from your third sister who loved you the most, right? The last sentence could be said to be malicious, but it also revealed the truth of the Fanine continent. Ji Tianyue was stunned for a moment, then she pursed her lips. Third sister wanted to break off the engagement with Brother Rongyu, so I didn't steal, but when you fell in love with him, your third sister hadn't broken off the engagement with him yet. At that time, your imperial father wanted to facilitate their marriage, right? Ji Tianyue was tongue-tied. Your third sister was so good to you. She wanted to give you all the good things and treated you so well. Is this how you schemed against your third sister? Little Tianyue, you're so young, but your skin is so thick. Is your heart so black? Ji Tianyue didn't expect that Brother Xia, who was always kind and cheerful to her, would reprimand her with such direct words. She was stunned for a moment, and her little face turned green and white. I didn't. I didn't. You didn't what? You didn't scheme against your third sister? Or you didn't fall in love with your third brother-in-law? Xia Fenglu pressed on. I didn't scheme against third sister. Brother Rongyu is not third brother-in-law. Ji Tianyue finally choked out a sentence. Little Tianyue, being thick-skinned is a good thing. I think as a princess, you should have this. You deliberately spread the news when Rongyu Tianlan was still your third brother-in-law, so that everyone would think that he came with you. You cried and made a scene in the palace, begging the South Heaven Emperor to help you and Rongyu Tianlan. You made the South Heaven Emperor force your third sister to break off the engagement. Wasn't this your scheme? Xia Fenglu had obviously investigated, and his words were sharper than the previous. Xia Fenglu exposed what Ji Tianyue had done in public. There were still many people present, and many of them did not know the inside story. Now that they heard Xia Fenglu's words, everyone's eyes focused on Ji Tianyue. Ji Tianyue didn't expect Brother Xia, who had always been gentle to her, who had brought her out to play a few times, and who would even stand up for her when she was bullied outside, to turn hostile today. After being stunned for a moment, she burst into tears. You bully me. Bullying a child. You've always been nice to me, but it turns out that it was all fake. Her crying was like a pear blossom in the rain. Originally, as long as she cried like this in the palace, almost everyone would serve her and feel sorry for her. Even Xia Fenglu back then was no exception. When she cried, he would coax her and even help her hit the person who made her cry. But now, Xia Fenglu stood there with his arms crossed. He was completely immune to her crying. Hearing her accusation, he smiled. Naturally, no one will bully a cute child. A child playing tricks in front of an adult is really asking for a beating. Also, little Tianyue, you have to understand one thing. Originally, my kindness to you was not fake, it was all real. But that was because of your third sister's face. I will only treat people who she treats sincerely. If it's just you, do you think you have the qualifications to be treated sincerely by me? Ji Tianyue, the people around them burst into laughter. Among them, the three Qi brothers laughed the loudest. Chapter 28:19. Third young Master Qi gave her a thumbs up, well said. Ji Tianyu's face turned even redder. She had always been pampered by others all her life. She could get whatever she wanted. She had never been mocked like this before. And she had never been watched like this before. Xia Fenglio's words were like stripping her naked in front of everyone, causing her to feel extremely embarrassed. She was still young after all, so she could not think of any words to refute Xia Fenglu. Furthermore, none of the people around her spoke up for her. This was the first time she had fallen into such a helpless situation. Her large eyes turned anxiously and landed on Ji Xinyu. She could not help but want to seek protection from her. Third sister, can you bear to let them bully your little sister like this? Ji Xinyu frowned slightly. Her little sister's skin was really thick. She still wanted to ask her for help at a time like this. Did she really think that she was a punching bag who only knew how to pamper her little sister? Before she could say anything, Sect Master Ziyun spoke up. Xinyu, were you injured in the mountains? Were you bullied? His handsome face darkened again. I know that you are a competitive girl and like to swallow your pride. But now that your master and senior brothers are all here, you don't have to endure it anymore. Speak up and your master will make the decision for you. Ji Xinyu felt warmth in her heart. Only in the sect could she receive so much love and care. However, she did not want her master to worry, so she smiled. I'm really fine. Master, your disciple is so capable. How could I be bullied? It's already good enough that I don't bully others. Also, the engagement this time was cancelled quite smoothly. After we arrived at the marriage pillar, we only needed to click on the option and the engagement was cancelled. There wasn't even a test. This shows that we are really not suitable for each other. Even the marriage pillar went easy on us. This topic attracted the attention of everyone present. When they heard that the marriage pillar went easy on them, everyone was very surprised and expressed that they had never heard of it before. However, Sect Master Ziyun frowned slightly and asked Ji Xinyu to explain the situation. There was no need to hide such things, so Ji Xinyu told him everything. Before Grandmaster Ziyun could say anything, the fat and thin walkers who were guarding the door suddenly interrupted. You said your name and his is golden on the pillar of marriage. And not silver. Are you sure? Ji Xinyu nodded. That's right, it's shiny. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. There's a silver one. The fat and thin walkers looked at each other, and the fat walker said, it can be said that almost everyone's name is silver, and very few have golden names. The thin walker also said, this has nothing to do with the depth of one's cultivation. Back then, there was a high immortal who went in. His and his wife's names were also silver. Ji Xinyu was stunned. What's with the golden color? Is there any explanation? The fat walker said, only a marriage destined by the heavens is golden. If the golden one wanted to break off the engagement, the pillar of marriage would not give a test. It was completely up to the person involved. They were considered a couple protected by the pillar of marriage. Out of billions of people, you won't meet a pair. The thin walker also added, however, there is a fatal flaw in this kind of marriage. People who have this kind of marriage are extremely in love with each other. They can have 3 lifetimes of love. However, once the engagement is broken, the 3 lifetimes of love will be cut off. It will be difficult to get back together again. The fat walker shook his head and said, that's right. Although it's easy to cancel a marriage arranged by heaven, getting back together is the most difficult. It's almost impossible. Chapter 28:20. Is it easy to reconcile with the silver runes? Someone asked. It's difficult. Marriage is not child's play, it's not a child's game for you to break up and get back together. Otherwise, it would lack the solemnity and holiness of the marriage pillar. However, the person with the silver runes is an ordinary person after all, the marriage pillar doesn't really care. As long as there's enough sincerity, it's not too difficult for 2 people who have broken off the engagement to reconcile. There have been many successful examples over the years. Once a marriage destined by heaven is broken off, it's a contempt for heaven's will. If you want to reconcile, it's going against heaven's will. Since ancient times, I've never heard of anyone succeeding. The fat walker looked at Ji Xinyu regretfully. Originally, I thought that you and His Highness Rongyu were quite compatible. I even looked forward to the day you 2 reconciled. Now, it seems that you and His Highness Rongyu are not fated. Ji Xinyu smiled and said, fortunately, I've never thought of reconciling with him. I don't have to worry about this. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly paused and her gaze fell on the entrance of the valley. At the entrance of the valley, Rongyu Tianlan was floating there. He was leaning against the stone wall and tapping the fan in his palm. He looked very free and easy, but his face was a little pale. No one knew when he came out, and no one knew how long he had been listening there. Brother Rongyu. Ji Tianyu finally saw him. As if she saw her savior, she cried out happily and pounced on him. Her figure was like a swallow returning to the forest. Rongyu Tianlan's eyes moved slightly. He gently raised his folding fan, and Ji Tianyu's body stopped in front of him, unable to take another step forward. Brother Rongyu. Ji Tianyu looked at him with grievance. She actually wanted to jump into his arms so that she could declare her sovereignty in front of everyone. However, Rongyu Tianlan obviously had no such intention. She had never touched his arms before. Fortunately, although Rongyu Tianlan did not let her hug him, his gaze was still gentle. You've been waiting here? Ji Tianyu nodded. Yes, I was waiting for Brother Rongyu to come out. I didn't dare to leave. She pointed to the pink tent not far away. That's Tianyu's. Rongyu Tianlan glanced at the tent and nodded slightly. Pack your things, I'll send you back. Ji Tianyu's eyes lit up. Brother Rongyu, are you using the unicorn carriage to send Tianyu back? Rongyu Tian responded with an aha. Quickly go and pack your things. Ji Tianyu's eyes sparkled as she looked around at the people around her. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and pulled Rongyu Tianlan's sleeve aggressively. Brother Rongyu, someone bullied me just now. You have to avenge me. When she said this, everyone present looked at each other in dismay. Most of the people were still a little afraid of Rongyu Tianlan, an exalted immortal. Therefore, when his gaze swept over them, those who had once mocked Ji Tianyu took a few steps back guiltily. Of course, there were also those who were not afraid of anything. For example, the Qi clan's 3rd young master, Changbubai, and the people from the Purple Cloud sect. Ji Xinyu frowned slightly, but she didn't say anything. She crossed her arms and looked on coldly as if it had nothing to do with her. Although Rongyu Yishanlin came out late and didn't see the scene at that time, he could roughly guess it based on everyone's reaction. He nodded and motioned for Ji Tianyue to continue. Ji Tianyue finally found the backstage and recounted the scene to him in full detail. When I finished speaking, my tears flowed out again. Chapter 28-21. In the end, tears flowed out again. They bullied me just now. Even my sister didn't speak up for Tianyue. Rongyu Yishanlin looked at Xie Fenglu indifferently. Xie Fenglu looked back with a smile. His eyes were sharp. Yes, I did say that about her. But I don't think I said anything wrong. Since you did it, you shouldn't be afraid of others talking about it. Does Your Highness Rongyu Yishanlin think that she did the right thing? Rongyu Yishanlin said indifferently, I don't think she did the right thing, but she's still a child, a spoiled child. Your Excellency shouldn't use such sharp words on her. Xie Fenglu smiled. His words were sharp enough. From your tone, it seems that you're really protecting her. It seems that this Princess Tianyue isn't a one-sided person. Are you really going to abandon your sister and marry her sister? Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. She put the complaint aside. She also wanted to hear Rongyu Yishanlin give her an answer. If Rongyu Yishanlin admitted his feelings for her in front of so many people, then their marriage would be set in stone. The people around were also waiting for Rongyu Yishanlin's answer. There were still many people who thought that even if Rongyu Yishanlin broke off the engagement with Ji Xinyu, he might not be interested in her sister. After all, the little girl was still too young and underage. Rongyu Yishanlin smiled. His expression did not change. He only said a few words. Everything is possible. After leaving such a thought-provoking sentence, he knocked on Ji Tianyue's shoulder with his fan. Be good, don't dawdle, go pack your things, I'll send you back. A little girl shouldn't always run around outside, it's very dangerous. This sentence was already filled with concern. Ji Tianyue indeed hurried to pack her tent. Rongyu Yishanlin raised his hand, pinched a spell, and flicked his finger towards the sky. A blue light shot straight into the sky. After a moment, two clear and long cries sounded in the sky. The two unique carriages pulled by the two unicorns appeared in the sky and landed on the ground in the blink of an eye. Ji Tianyue naturally had her attendants. However, in order to let Rongyu Tianlan help her and show off their affection in front of others, she had ordered the attendants to leave the valley as soon as Ji Xinyu came out. Now, Rongyu Tianlan had asked her to clean up these things herself. After all, she had never done these things before, so she cleaned up in a mess. Because he was too anxious, his head was almost hit by the falling tent. After Rongyu Tianlan summoned her mount, she turned around and saw her like this. The corners of her lips couldn't help but twitch as she waved her folding fan. It was as if a pair of invisible hands were tidying up the tent. In the blink of an eye, it was tidied up neatly. His voice sounded faintly, get on the carriage first. Tell your guards to take the tent and luggage back. Ji Tianyue. Okay. She blushed. How did Brother Rongyu know that I brought guards? She thought that as long as she appeared here alone, Rongyu Tianlan wouldn't know. Was there even a need to guess? She was so clumsy when she was packing her luggage. It was obvious that she was a delicate young lady who was waiting for someone to serve her. If she had been waiting here alone, the tent would have been turned into a pigsty by her. How could it still be so clean and tidy? Rongyu Tianlan was too lazy to answer such an idiotic question. He turned around, got on the carriage first, and said 3 words, get on. Ji Tianyue got on the carriage with a red face. She looked at Rongyu Tianlan who was sitting outside the carriage and subconsciously wanted to sit beside him. Chapter 28-22. Tianyue, go inside and sit. Rongyu Ishinlan frowned and stopped her. But I want to sit beside big brother Rongyue. Tianyue pouted. It's windy outside, you won't be able to stand it. Be a good girl and go inside. Rongyu Ishinlan's words were gentle, but her actions were forceful. She did not leave any space for Tianyue. Tianyue felt that Rongyu Ishinlan's aura was a little cold, but she did not dare to disobey. She obediently agreed, okay, Tianyue knows that big brother Rongyue dotes on me. Tianyue will be obedient. After saying that, she glanced at Ji Shinyu proudly. However, Ji Shinyu didn't even look at them. She was busy helping her master pack up the tent. Her hands were nimble, and the tent was folded neatly in a short while. The things inside were also organized neatly, and it looked exceptionally pleasing to the eye. The Purple Cloud sect master looked very satisfied. He put a hand on his disciple's shoulder and said, seeing that you gave me a fate bead, I won't pursue the matter of you delaying my birthday. Follow me back to the Purple Cloud sect next. It was rare that her master was not fussy this time. Ji Shinyu also heaved a sigh of relief. She did not dare to push away her master's hand and said, Master's birthday is the most important thing in the world. Master, there are still 5 days to your birthday. Why don't you let your disciple prepare one for you? The Purple Cloud sect master could not be more satisfied. He simply put his whole arm on his disciple's shoulder and said, very good, I knew that our Shinyu is the most capable. Then help me into the carriage. He raised his hand, and a super flashy carriage appeared out of thin air. The whole carriage was made of deep-sea tortoiseshell, and a cloud pattern was inlaid on it with southern sea purple pearl. On the roof of the carriage stood a lifelike red-crowned crane carved out of an unknown material. It was as if it could fly down from the roof of the carriage and dance with just a breath of air. The beast pulling the carriage was even more flashy. It was actually a snow-white dragon. At this moment, Rongyu Ishinlan's carriage had not left yet. The two carriages were parked in the south and north, facing the wind. No matter whether it was the grandeur or the luxurious level, it was actually the same, stunning everyone below. Everyone knew that the Purple Cloud sect was rich, but they didn't expect it to be this rich. Shi Shuangqing originally wanted to invite Ji Shinyu to ride with him, as he felt that his own carriage would not disgrace Ji Shinyu's status. However, when he saw Grandmaster Zi Yun's carriage, he felt a little ashamed of his own inferiority. He couldn't bring himself to say any more words of invitation. However, he had traveled a long and arduous journey to this place, so he naturally did not want to return empty-handed. He hurriedly took a step forward and said, Shinyu, this little king will pay a visit to the Nantian Palace in a few days. At that time, we will be able to meet again. Unfortunately, I am not familiar with the Nantian clan. I wonder if Princess Shinyu can spare some time to accompany this little king for a stroll around the Nantian clan. Ji Shinyu didn't say anything, but Xia Fenglu, who was beside her, narrowed his eyes and smiled. Does the Twin Cities prince want to go to Nantian Palace to propose marriage? Have you taken a fancy to my senior sister? This question was too direct. Shi Shuangqing paused for a moment, but he didn't deny it. Yes, Princess Shinyu is now a free woman. A gentleman would love to have a fair and graceful woman. I happen to be unmarried. Xia Fenglu raised his eyebrows and interrupted him. Unmarried? I heard that you, little prince, have 8 wives by your side. How could that be? I only have 2 servants by my side. At this point, Shi Shuangqing's words suddenly stopped. Chapter 28-23. His 2 maidservants had always been secretly raised in the residence to take care of their physical needs. He didn't even give them a status, and their status was only slightly higher than that of his maidservants. He had sealed the news so tightly that no one in the outside world knew about it. Even his father, the emperor, didn't know about it. Who would have thought that he would be so stupid as to be provoked by Xie Fenglu to tell the truth? Shi Shuangqing was originally a very scheming person, but even he couldn't believe that he would fall for such an obvious trick. Was there water in his brain? He glared at Xie Fenglu. You used an eye technique. Xie Fenglu shrugged and didn't deny it. Indeed, but my eye technique only makes people speak the truth. It doesn't make people talk nonsense. So Prince Shi Shuangqing already has 2 beautiful concubines, so you don't need to have any ideas about my senior sister. A person like my senior sister deserves the most sincere and attentive treatment from the most outstanding man. And you obviously don't qualify. Shi Shuangqing. He was unwilling to give up. He looked at Ji Xinyu, who had already boarded the luxurious carriage. This prince fell in love with Princess Xinyu at first sight. If I had known that there was someone like Princess Xinyu, this prince would have waited for this day even if he didn't touch women. Xinyu, if you are willing, this prince is willing to scatter all the concubines around you. The veins on Ji Xinyu's forehead throbbed. Her peach blossoms seemed to have bloomed more vigorously today. Xie Fenglu directly blocked for her. That won't do. My senior sister only likes young men. She doesn't want those who have already lost their virginity. This sentence had quite a shocking effect. Everyone looked up, dumbfounded. Shi Shuangqing's handsome face flushed slightly. This young Master Xie's words are deliberately difficult. According to the rules of the Fanning continent, a man needs to have a woman break through the yang at the age of 800, understand human affairs, and adjust the yin and yang. How can there be young men nowadays? Young Master Xie's words, aren't you deliberately making things difficult? Xie Fenglu sat at the shaft of the carriage with his legs crossed and said with a smile, you're wrong. There are many capable young men in this world. Shi Shuangqing was unconvinced. Who? Give me some examples. Xie Fenglu giggled and pointed his finger at himself. I'm not talented, I'm a standard young man. He gestured with his chin towards the interior of the carriage. My master too. Ji Xinyu, who had just helped her master into the carriage, stumbled when she heard this, and almost fell into the carriage with her master. The sect leader of the Purple Cloud sect shook his hand and threw out a walnut. Bastard, what nonsense are you spouting? Hurry up and drive. If you miss my birthday, I'll skin you alive. The walnut almost hit the back of Xie Fenglu's head. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and caught it with his hand. He rubbed his sore fingers and complained, Master, did you really hit me? Sooner or later, this clever disciple will be smashed into a fool by you. As your master, I hope that you'll be foolish for a while so that you don't have to spout so much nonsense and anger your master to death. The Purple Cloud sect master's cold voice rang out. He seemed to have finally remembered something as he lifted the curtain of the carriage and flicked a gilded invitation card towards Rongyu Yishenlen, who was not far away. His tone was steady as he said, 5 days later, it will be my birthday. I hope that old friend can come and meet me. He didn't wait for Rongyu Tianlan to answer and smashed another walnut on Xie Fenglu's head. Why are you in a daze? Hurry up. Yes, master. Xie Fenglu rubbed the back of his head and raised the golden whip in his hand. With a snap, the luxurious carriage rose into the air and flew away in the blink of an eye. Chapter 28-24. The other disciples of the Purple Cloud sect naturally rose into the air and followed. Feng Wuji was a reliable person. Before he left, he glanced at Shi Shuangqing and said, Prince Shi Shuangqing, my junior martial sister has cut ties with the Southern Sky royal family. Her marriage will be decided by my teacher. No one else is allowed to interfere. You don't have to waste your time in the Southern Sky Palace. After saying this, he also rose into the air and chased after his master's carriage. Shi Shuangqing was speechless. He never expected this to be the outcome after waiting for so long. He had long heard that the disciples of the Purple Cloud sect were eccentric and mysterious, and none of them were easy to deal with. Now it seemed that it was true. For Ji Xinyu to be born in such a sect, it was no wonder that her temperament was so special, even more direct and fiery than men. Thinking of Ji Xinyu's skills and her stunning beauty, Shi Shuangqing felt an itch in his heart, as if it was on fire. After being rebuffed like this, his competitive spirit was stimulated. He had to ask for this marriage. Even if Xia Fenglu and sect master Zi Yun were virgins, they couldn't possibly become Ji Xinyu's husband, right? Sect master Zi Yun was Ji Xinyu's master, and the Fanning continent did not have a relationship between master and disciple, so sect master Zi Yun could be excluded. As for this Xia Fenglu, he was just a disciple of a humble family. No matter how high his martial arts and intelligence were, he was not worthy of Ji Xinyu, who was of noble birth, right? Therefore, there was still hope for him, the favored prince of the Western Sky clan. After all, among the descendants of the four royal families in the Fanning continent, besides Rongyue Tianlan, Xishuang City was ranked second. Regardless of identity, status, or appearance, they were all top-notch, worthy of Ji Xinyu. As long as he obtained Ji Xinyu's heart first, everything would be fine. Right now, the most important thing was to send people back to deal with the two concubines, and then he would think of a way. He had already made up his mind. When he looked up, he suddenly saw that Rongyue Tianlan's car hadn't left yet. The unicorn was already impatiently pawing its four hooves in the air, while Rongyu Yishanlan was sitting in front of the carriage with a fan in her hand. She was looking at the misty mountain thoughtfully. As if sensing Shi Shuangqing's gaze, he lowered his eyes and glanced at him. This gaze was like frost and lightning, causing Shi Shuangqing's heart to tremble. Shi Shuangqing calmed himself down and cupped his fists. Her Highness Rongyu. But in his heart, he was pondering the reason why Her Highness had not left yet. But he soon found out. Because he saw two women who looked like maids rushing in from outside the valley, panting as they saluted Rongyue Tianlan's carriage. Greetings to Your Highness Rongyue, Princess Tianyue. Rongyue Tianlan turned around and asked Ji Tianyue, who was standing close to the carriage, which maid do you want to have serve you along the way? Ji Tianyue pouted and whispered, Tianyue doesn't need them to serve her. She just wanted to be alone with Rongyue Tianlan and didn't want anyone else present. Rongyue Tian didn't care, childish words. You're a princess, what's wrong with having no one to serve you? Pick one. Ji Tianyue blurted out, my sister is also a princess. She has never allowed anyone to serve her. Rongyue Tianlan glanced at her, how can you compare to her? He probably felt that this sentence was a bit harsh, so he changed his words, you two are different. She has lived outside since she was young and is used to being independent. You, on the other hand, have been living in the palace. I'm afraid that you won't even be able to eat. Alright, I'm doing this for your own good. Pick one, we'll be on our way. Chapter 28-25. Ji Tianyue had no choice but to choose a maid who usually spoke little and had a weak presence, and let her come up. The servant girl was naturally very excited to be able to sit in such a dreamy carriage. Her eyes shone uncontrollably, and she was so nervous that she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. Rongyue Tianlan ordered her, help your princess sit inside. The servant girl agreed and helped the unwilling Ji Tianyue into the carriage. A silver whip appeared in Rongyue Tianlan's palm. A circle of whip shadows flashed past, and the unicorn also flew away. Shi Shuangqing was deep in thought. His Highness Rongyue insisted on having a servant girl in the carriage. Was this to avoid the awkwardness of being alone in the carriage with Ji Tianyue? To avoid arousing suspicion. Shi Shuangqing was a Casanova, and he could guess the thoughts of others. He always felt that His Highness Rongyue's actions were a little strange, and could not be judged by common sense. His Highness Rongyue seemed to have been paying attention to his ex-fiancée Ji Xinyue's movements. When Ji Xinyue carried sect master Ziyun into the carriage, His Highness Rongyue's expression seemed a little bad, but he did not react. His Highness Rongyue's attitude towards Ji Tianyue was also a little vague. He seemed to want to treat Ji Tianyue well, but when Ji Tianyue threw a little princess tantrum, he suppressed the annoyance in his heart and coaxed her. There was even a flash of impatience between his brows, but his rationality made him impatient. His Highness Rongyue's actions were also a little contradictory. The wind was biting cold, and the clothes were cold. The contradictory Rongyue Tianlan had been sitting outside the carriage. He sat in a carefree and unrestrained manner, with one leg slightly bent and one arm propped on his leg, supporting his cheek. He was still holding the gilded invitation in his hand, but his eyes were looking forward, and there was no expression on his handsome face. There was a faint sound coming from the carriage. It was not loud, but it could not escape Rongyue Tianlan's ears. This is Brother Rongyue's carriage. You have no right to sit in it. Stand over there. Don't come over until I call you. Aya, your shoes are too dirty. Don't dirty Brother Rongyue's carriage. Don't step on it. Don't step on it. Hey! Why are you taking off your shoes? Do you think your feet are clean? Stupid. The servant seemed to be at a loss and was about to cry, Princess, what do you want me to do? Kneel. Kneeling in that corner. Stupid. Yes, Rongyue Tian tightened her grip on the fan. The longer he interacted with Princess Ji Tianyue, the more he couldn't help but frown. Unruly, willful, naive, but not cute at all, she clearly looked the same as Jiyu, but at first glance, she seemed to have a similar temper. But after getting to know her for a long time, this Ji Tianyu's personality was very different from Jiyu's. For example, although Jiyu was occasionally unruly and willful, she still had a bottom line. She treated her servants very well and was very loyal. She had been traumatized by the tragic death of one of her maids. She was afraid that she would implicate her maids and did not dare to escape. And this Ji Tianyu always ordered the maids around her, not taking them seriously at all. Although the Fanning continent was also a power politics with a strict class hierarchy, and most of the nobles were not good to their servants, Rongyue Tianlan still felt disappointed when she saw Ji Tianyue like this. Another example was that Jiyu had always been kind-hearted. She valued her family very much. Otherwise, she wouldn't have tried so hard to save her parents. For her parents, she seemed to be able to do anything. Chapter 28-26. It was also because of this that she went crazy when she saw her parents being beheaded, causing their relationship to go on a path of no return. Although Ji Tianyue was loved by the world, she was indifferent to family. She only liked to take and didn't like to give. Her parents' and sisters' love was a matter of course in her eyes, and she probably didn't even think about returning the favor. Rongyue Tianlan was still very good at judging people. He dared to bet that with Ji Tianyue's current temperament, if she encountered the same situation as Jiyu, she wouldn't choose to sacrifice herself to save her parents. Her first thought would probably be annoyance that she was implicated by her parents. Most people's temperament would change after reincarnation. After all, their living environment was different, so their temperament would more or less change. Especially if it wasn't the reincarnation of the original soul, there was no guarantee. For example, Jun Liuye, who was reincarnated from his battle soul, had a different temperament from his original body. At least his original body didn't have any ambition to conquer the world, and he didn't agree with some of Jun Liuya's methods. He even considered that if his original body was reincarnated as Jun Liuya, he wouldn't be so heartless when dealing with his relationship with Ji Yu, and wouldn't use his beloved to achieve various political goals. Therefore, it was understandable that Ji Yu and Ji Tianyue had different temperaments. However, Rongyue Tianlan always felt that Ji Tianyue and Ji Yu were very different in nature, as if they weren't the same person. Sometimes, he even suspected that Ji Shinyu was the former Ji Yu. When he was with Ji Shinyu, he even took out her soul to take a look while she was asleep, but he couldn't see any difference between her soul and her original body. In his previous life as Jun Liuya, although his martial arts weren't bad, he didn't know any spells. He had never seen what Ji Yu's soul looked like, so he couldn't tell at all. Before he recovered the memories of that soul, he only had Ji Yu's general appearance in his mind. He thought that God had given him a good marriage and gave him a direction to look for. Therefore, when he saw Ji Tianyue, who looked like Ji Yu, he felt as if he had found a treasure and felt that he was really lucky. The Red Luan Star had sent him his sweetheart without him having to spend too much effort to find her. The heavens were indeed merciful. However, after interacting with Ji Tianyue for a while, he still couldn't find any feelings. Looking at Ji Tianyue was no different from looking at ordinary girls. At that time, he even suspected that the girl's appearance in his mind was a joke played by God to mess with his thoughts. Because in his mind, girls like Ji Tianyue were not outstanding at all. Even if he had not seen 100 girls like her in his life, he had seen at least 80. Facing Ji Tianyue wasn't even as good as facing Yunxi. Of course, his feelings towards Yunxi were that of a friend. He had never considered her as a lover. He never thought that one day he would fall in love with a girl like Ji Tianyue. In fact, he still hadn't fallen in love with her. Unknowingly, his gaze was attracted to Ji Shinyu, and he became more and more concerned about her. His thoughts revolved around her more and more, and he couldn't help but pay attention to her, and couldn't help but want to hug her. This was the first time he felt heartache for a girl. Before he recovered that melodramatic memory, he even wanted to get rid of that shadow in his mind and follow his own wishes. He wanted to get Ji Shinyu back and not cancel this engagement. There are still days. Chapter 28-27. However, just as he was about to make this decision, he recovered his memories of Ji Yu. That kind of pain, that kind of sorrow, surged in his mind, cutting his usually calm heart into pieces. It was so painful that he almost couldn't breathe. When he recovered his memories, his first thought was to never let her down again. He knew that some people might not look the same when they were reincarnated, but that would only happen when their souls were incomplete. For example, Jun Liuya, who was reincarnated from his soul, looked very different from him. However, if the other party's soul was complete, his appearance wouldn't change. At most, his personality would change due to the environment. It was impossible for two people to look so similar in this world, unless they were twins or had the same soul. Even their names were only one word apart. This definitely couldn't be explained by the word coincidence. In fact, Rongyu Tianlan had also reluctantly used the word coincidence to deduce her identity. She even took out her soul to take a look when this little girl was asleep. Her soul was the same as her body, and her face was exactly the same as Ji Yu's. Therefore, there could only be one answer: Ji Tianyue was Ji Yu. This answer was a little cruel, but Rongyu Ishanlan couldn't think of any other reason to refute this answer. Perhaps Ji Yu was also the reincarnation of Ji Shinyue's soul. But why did her reincarnation look so much like Ji Tianyue? Wasn't it too unreasonable for her to be reincarnated as a younger sister? Even if there were similarities between sisters, it shouldn't be to the extent that they looked like they were carved from the same mold, right? He looked down at the invitation and flicked it with his finger. Before he left the Sanine continent, he and sect master Ziyun were half good friends and got along well. This sect master celebrated his birthday every year and was very happy. At that time, he also threw him an invitation every year. When he wasn't busy, he would also go there for a stroll. Of course, he wasn't busy at that time, so he only went there a dozen times in total. Now, this sect master threw him another invitation. He knew that he was used to it, but should he go this time? He knew that he had different feelings for Ji Xinhua, and his feelings had already shifted beyond his control. However, he couldn't let Ji Yu down, so he decided not to meet her for the time being. Maybe his infatuation with her was only temporary, and it would cool down after a while. After cooling down for a while, perhaps he would treat her like a normal friend, just like how he treated Yunxi. He lowered his eyes and looked at the invitation card in his hand. Then, he wouldn't go to sect leader Zi Yun's birthday this time. He exerted a little force with his fingertips, and the gilded invitation turned into butterflies in the wind. Brother Rongyue. Ji Tianyue lifted the curtain and poked her head out, but before she could finish her sentence, she was blown back by the strong wind. Because the car was traveling too fast in the air, the wind was biting cold and frightening. Ji Tianyue almost fainted from the wind. She hurriedly lowered the curtain again, but was unwilling to give up. Brother Rongyu, cough, cough, it's so windy outside, why don't you come in? No need. Rongyue Tian responded with 2 words. But the wind will hurt you. Ji Tianyue's voice was full of concern. It won't. Rongyue Tian had set up a wind barrier around his body, so the wind couldn't actually blow him. Why don't you come in and warm up first? Let Xiao Rong drive the carriage outside, okay? I'm the only one who can drive this carriage, no one else can. Rongyue Tian finally spoke a few more words. Chapter 28. Ji Tianyue paused and pursed her lips. Although she and big brother Rongyu returned in the same carriage, one was outside the carriage and the other was inside, she didn't know if Rongyu Tianlan had to drive the carriage, but since he said so, she could only believe him. She paused and blushed. Big brother Rongyu personally drove Tianyue back. Tianyue couldn't bear it. Big brother Rongyu is an immortal and the prince of the East Sky clan. How noble is your identity. Rongyu Tianlan was silent for a moment and said indifferently, I only do things according to my interest, I never consider identity. Was this little girl only interested in his status? If he was an ordinary person and drove the carriage here, would this little girl be so happy and uneasy? He never cared about the identity of the person he liked. As long as he liked, even if the other party was a daughter of a poor family, he would still like her. It was just that the heavens seemed to be playing a joke on him, always involving him with the princess. From Ji Tianyue's words, Rongyu Tianlan could hear her snobbishness, his fingers holding the fan tightened faintly. Back then, Ji Yu fell in love with Yi Qianshang, and in Ji Yu's knowledge, he was just a Jianghu killer. Ji Yu had no concept of a person's identity at all. Love was love. Even if he was just a wandering assassin, she would still wait to marry him with all her heart. If she was as snobbish as Ji Tianyue now, there wouldn't be all of this later. Big brother Rongyu, I don't care about a person's identity. Seemingly aware of Rongyu Tianlan's silence, Ji Tianyue hurriedly explained. She was afraid that Rongyu Tianlan wouldn't believe her, so she hurriedly gave several examples. For example, when she saw beggars on the street, she would ask for alms, and when she ate in a restaurant, she would give tips. She said a lot of things. Rongyu Tianlan sat there, waving the folding fan in his hand and listening without interrupting. Ji Tianyue couldn't see his expression from inside the carriage, so she didn't know what he thought about what she said. She was a little nervous as she spoke. Big brother Rongyu, are you listening? Rongyu Tianlan responded, I'm listening, just say it. The more she spoke, the more he understood about her. Rongyu Tianlan was an old fox who had been in the Jianghu for a long time. He could tell which of Ji Tianyue's words were true and which were false. From her words, he could also read her inner world, her true personality and temper. Ji Tianyue and Rongyu Tianlan didn't have many chances to interact with each other. When they were together, she would try her best to cover up her shortcomings and show off her strengths, so that she could gain more points in his heart. However, she was still a child after all. Once she got excited, she would often reveal her own shortcomings. It would be better if Rongyu Tian didn't notice this, but once he started to seriously analyze her in his heart, she couldn't hide her foxtail anymore. Beautiful, naive, selfish, cold, liked to sow discord in words, liked to pretend to be innocent. This was Rongyu Tianlan's temporary evaluation of her in her heart. Perhaps she had some other problems, but Rongyu Tianlan couldn't tell from her words at the moment. If people only associate with each other on the surface, you will never discover the true character of those who are good at disguising themselves. If you really want to understand someone, you have to go through some things with her. Chapter 28-29. He thought of Ji Yu again, and found the biggest difference between them. Ji Yu was beautiful, innocent, kind, and loyal. She was brave and liked to take risks. Although she was a little reckless, she was still cute. When he thought of Ji Yu now, other than the familiar heartache, he also had the urge to hug her. Facing Ji Tianyue, who had the same face as her, he couldn't bring up the desire to be close to her. Even when she was close to him, he instinctively felt disgusted. Actually, he didn't need to drive this carriage outside. He had been sitting in this carriage all along. He didn't want to go in now because he didn't want to be alone with Ji Tianyue. Was it because he had fallen in love with Ji Xinyue, so he instinctively hated Ji Tianyue? Or was this Ji Tianyue not Ji Yu's reincarnation at all? Thinking of this last point, Rongyu Yishinlan's fingers tightened on the fan again. Brother Rongyu Yishinlan, I have a pet name in the palace. You can call me by that name. In the carriage, Ji Tianyue had already started talking about her pet name. What pet name? Rongyu Yishinlan asked casually. Little Moon. Rongyu Yishinlan's fingers trembled and the fan almost fell. Little Moon. Yes, isn't it nice? I heard that when my mother gave birth to me, she dreamed of swallowing a little moon. So father was very happy and called me Little Moon. However, he doesn't call me that in front of others because of my princess status. He only calls me that when there's no one around. You can call me that too. Ji Tianyue was excited. Rongyu Yishinlan's face turned slightly pale. Another one matched. If this was a coincidence, then there were too many coincidences in this world. But their temperaments were indeed very different. Their living environment was clearly similar. They were both little princesses who were extremely doted on by their parents. Why were their temperaments so different when they grew up? Ji Xinyue's appearance appeared in his mind again, and his heart suddenly ached. When they were in the scroll of the universe, he had clearly felt that she had fallen in love with him. Although that girl hid it well, she couldn't hide it from an old fox like him. Now that this marriage had been cancelled, would she be very sad? Would she be sad when she couldn't sleep at night? Would she also think of him? In fact, Ji Xinyu didn't even have time to be sad. She was so busy that she was about to go crazy. Sect Master Ziyun probably wanted to find some balance, so he handed over all the preparations for his birthday to Ji Xinyu. He gave her all the authority, and she could command all the disciples as she wished, including her senior and junior brothers. Grandmaster Ziyun was waiting for his disciple to give him a big surprise. Ji Xinyu actually had a headache. In the past, these things were all handled by her senior brother, and she was just a small errand boy. Now that she was suddenly asked to take on the responsibility, she felt a little pressured. Grandmaster Ziyun was a very fussy person. He had to come up with something new for his birthday every year. Otherwise, he would be unhappy for a year and give his disciples a hard time for a year. However, he celebrated his birthday every year, and after so many years, he had almost gone through all the tricks. How could it be easy to come up with new tricks? Feng Wuji had been troubled by this issue for a long time, but now that he had finally gotten rid of it, he was relieved. The gratified eldest senior brother patted Ji Xinyu's shoulder and cheered her on, telling her to do well. Ji Xinyu felt the veins on her forehead throbbing. Time was tight and the mission was important. Ever since Ji Xinyu returned, she had been so busy that her feet barely touched the ground. Chapter 28:30. Time was tight and the task was heavy. Ever since Ji Xinyu returned, she had been so busy that her feet barely touched the ground. Her mind was filled with plans for her master's birthday. She was not in the mood to be sad, let alone think of a certain person. This was her first time doing this, so she was a little confused at first. Fortunately, her senior and junior brothers were willing to help her. Especially her senior brother Feng Wuji and ninth junior brother Xia Fenglu, they became her right-hand men. Many things were done without waiting for her orders. For example, writing invitations, arranging banquets, and so on. As for the new trick, she still had to do it. For the past 2 days, she had been having meetings with her senior and junior brothers every night to discuss the new trick, but every time she suggested something, it was rejected. Her sixth senior brother had a terrifying memory. He remembered every trick for her master's birthday in the past 3,000 years. Ji Xinyu could not help but admire him. The day after tomorrow was her master's birthday. Everything else was already in place, but the new trick was still uncertain. Ji Xinyu was so anxious that her mouth was blistering. In the end, she panicked and looked at the baby-faced Xia Fenglu beside her. Suddenly, an idea came to her. Ninth brother, why don't you wear colorful clothes to entertain your family? Xia Fenglu's face was immediately filled with fear. Senior sister, don't trick me. I'm a man. I don't want to wear colorful clothes to entertain my family. If people find out, I won't be able to find a wife. Feng Wuji patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, you're so handsome. Even if you dress up as a bear, there will be plenty of women who want to marry you. Xia Fenglu's name was indeed romantic. He was very popular with women outside. The number of women who wanted to marry him could circle the purple cloud sect twice. Xia Fenglu sighed. Those women are all ordinary. I don't want to marry them. I have to preserve my chastity until the end. Pfft. Ji Xinyu spat out her tea. Her junior brother liked to shock people with his words. Men have chastity too. Then what kind of women do you like? Second senior brother asked excitedly. Xia Fenglu's big black eyes immediately looked at Ji Xinyu and said without hesitation, little senior sister, like this. Ji Xinyu raised her hand and gave him a knuckle. Don't be rude. I'm your senior sister. This kind of joke is not allowed. Xia Fenglu looked at her with resentment. You're my senior sister, not my master. How can I be so disrespectful when I like you? Ji Xinyu glared at him. Brat, you almost became my disciple, do you know that? Xia Fenglu leaned against her and put his arm around her shoulder. Fortunately, I had the foresight to not take you as my master. Senior sister, you've already broken off your engagement with that scumbag. How about we have an older sister and younger brother relationship? Ji Xinyu kicked him away along with his stool. It doesn't matter if you have foresight, I don't like immature children. Xie Fenglu nimbly somersaulted in the air, and caught the chair that flew out with him. His toes tapped on the beam, and he sat back down on the chair. He looked at Ji Xinyu with his big eyes, feeling wronged. Senior sister, you're so rude. Senior sister has always been this crude, it's not like you've never known. Ji Xinyu didn't think much of it. She had naturally taken note of his nimble movements. Old 9, your martial arts have improved again. Xie Fenglu immediately held his head high and puffed out his chest. Of course. I've been practicing my martial arts with my head hanging from the beam, so that I can catch up to senior sister as soon as possible. Chapter 28-31. It was just that she had painstakingly thought of a new idea to celebrate her master's birthday, but it was ruthlessly rejected by this brat, which made her a little sad. She even tried to persuade him, Old 9, look at how beautiful you are. Once you dress up as a woman, you'll be devastatingly beautiful, and outsiders won't be able to recognize you. But master will be able to. When the time comes, you can perform a dance in front of him. Master will definitely be very happy, and senior sister's mission will be completed. And he will also love you even more. If you help senior sister will also love you even more. Don't you want to learn a set of leg techniques from me? After completing this mission, I'll teach you. How about it? Xie Fenglu looked at her with his chin in his hands. Looks like senior sister is serious. Of course, I can't be more serious. The more Ji Xinyu thought about it, the better the idea was. Good. Xie Fenglu suddenly slammed the table, scaring the surrounding senior brothers. Ji Xinyu's eyes lit up. Old 9, you're too good. Senior sister didn't dote on you for nothing. Xie Fenglu patted his chest. For senior sister, I'm willing to give up everything. However, senior sister, I also have a condition. Speak. The biggest problem was about to be solved, so Ji Xinyu was exceptionally easy to talk to. We're going to do a double dance. I'll dress up as a woman and you'll dress up as a man. I think we can even arrange a soul-stirring scene. Master definitely hasn't seen such a double dance before, so he'll be even happier. This idea was indeed novel, and all the senior brothers present cheered. Ji Xinyu didn't have any objections to dressing up as a man. After all, she was used to it, so it wouldn't be exposed. However, to arrange a play, it wasn't something that could be done overnight. At the very least, the play needed a script. Ji Xinyu voiced her concerns. Xie Fenglu smiled, then suddenly took out a book from his chest and waved it in front of Ji Xinyu. Senior sister, don't worry, I've already written the script. You just need to perform according to this. Ji Xinyu was stunned for a moment. She took the book and looked at it, then looked at her precious junior brother from the corner of her eyes. So you already thought of this idea? Why didn't you say so earlier? Xie Fenglu smiled, revealing 2 dimples on his baby face. I just wanted to see if anyone had any better ideas. Besides, when I wrote this script, I didn't want to play the role of a female lead. I wanted senior sister to play the female lead, and I would play the male lead. His fellow disciples booed him together. If little junior sister plays the female lead, do you think you'll get the male lead? That's right. The male lead is so handsome. I think eldest senior brother is more suitable for this role. That's right, that's right. Oh, Joe, you're so pretty. You're not suitable for a handsome character. Xie Fenglu was speechless. He chuckled and said, it seems that everyone wants to play a role in the movie. How about this? Why don't you all play the female lead? The senior brothers retreated together. Let's not. Our masculine aura is too strong. If we dress up as women, we'll be seen as evil spirits. Old 9, you are the most suitable. While everyone was talking, Feng Wuji had already flipped through the script from beginning to end. He then looked at Xia Fenglu with dissatisfaction. This play seems to only have 2 people. Looks like we don't need to appear. Xia Fenglu thought for a moment. Since it's a play for the birthday banquet, of course it has to be short. Of course, we'll kill off all the irrelevant people. However, if senior brothers really want to act as extras, I can arrange a few roles for you. Chapter 28-32. All the senior brothers expressed their interest and asked him what roles he wanted. Xia Fenglu thought for a while. We're still missing 2 horses, 2 tree stumps, and a bear. How about you guys play these roles? 7 or 8 teacups were thrown at Xia Fenglu. Get lost. Go to hell. Little bastard. Xia Fenglu had already jumped onto the roof beam and caught a stack of teacups. He smiled and said, "Senior brothers, this is the first time we've done something like this. Master will definitely be moved to tears when he sees his obedient disciples going all out for his birthday. He might even be happy for an entire year." This birthday banquet was planned by senior sister. If Master is happy, senior sister will be happy too. Don't you think so? I even dare to act as a woman. You guys are just extras, acting as tree stumps or something. It's actually very easy. Xia Fenglu had always been eloquent. After such an eloquent lecture, all the senior brothers were finally moved. Master being happy was one thing, but if they could make junior sister happy too, it was worth considering. After all, junior sister had it too hard. Everyone finally agreed and was assigned roles. Apart from eldest senior brother, who needed to entertain guests from the outside world, the other senior brothers and junior brothers all took a role and went to prepare. Among them, Xia Fenglu was the happiest. Senior sister, you're going to be with me for the next 2 days. We have to rehearse, are you happy? So this was the kid's goal. Ji Xinyu hugged her arms. Happy, of course I'm happy. Especially when I think of you swinging your sleeves and doing a beauty dance, I'm very happy. Xia Fenglu was speechless. He looked at Ji Xinyu with resentment. Senior sister, why do I feel like you're not happy, but gloating? Ji Xinyu smiled and patted Xia Fenglu's shoulder, almost knocking him down. Good boy, you know the truth. Xia Fenglu rubbed his shoulder. Senior sister, I think you should be gentler. Also, I'm not a child anymore. I'm already 1,200 years old. Ji Xinyu raised her eyebrows. Gentle? You want to find gentleness from me? Little Fenglu, did you take the wrong medicine? He patted him on the shoulder and said, good boy. No matter how old you are now, you are still a child in my eyes. He smiled and walked out. Xia Fenglu stood where he was, his eyes flashing slightly. Senior sister, you're good at everything, but you're a little too domineering, even more domineering than a man. I have to become stronger so that I can protect you and protect you from the storms of the outside world. Perhaps only then will I be able to see your weak side. Ji Tianyue never thought that Rongyu Yishanlin would send her back to Nantian Palace in just 1 day. It was indeed a one-of-a-kind winged unicorn. No one else could match its speed. She originally wanted to spend a few days with Rongyu Tianlan and stay at a hotel or something along the way. However, she didn't expect that she would arrive above Nantian Palace in just 1 day. When the carriage slowed down, Ji Tianyue heard the cheers coming from below. She cautiously lifted the curtain and looked down. Then, she saw the familiar building. She was both regretful and happy as she laughed. Brother Rongyu, your car is simply too fast. I've never seen a car that fast. As she spoke, she walked out of the car. Then, she froze. Chapter 28:33. There was no one outside the carriage. Rongyue Tianlan, who was supposed to be driving the carriage outside, was nowhere to be seen. The Wind Unicorn pulled the carriage and quickly landed. The South Heaven Emperor had already heard the news and hurried over. He was very pleased to see his little daughter coming down from such a luxurious carriage. Tianyue, I've received news that His Highness Rongyue personally sent you back. I didn't expect it to be so soon. He looked at the carriage again and only saw the little handmaiden following behind. He was surprised to see no one else. Where is His Highness Rongyue? Ji Tianyue was tongue-tied. The little handmaiden spoke quickly. His Highness Rongyue was driving the carriage outside just now. How did he disappear so quickly? The South Heaven Emperor had already looked inside and outside the carriage. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. His Highness Rongyue has been driving the carriage outside all this time. He didn't rest in the carriage. The little handmaiden nodded. Yes, Her Highness invited His Highness Rongyue in on the way. But His Highness Rongyue refused and said that this carriage must be driven by someone, and only he can do it. So he didn't enter the carriage at all. The wind was too strong on the way, so Her Highness Rongyue couldn't go out. But they kept talking. His Highness Rongyue was still in the carriage an hour ago. The little handmaiden poured out everything that happened along the way. Ji Tianyue's little face turned red. She felt like she had been slapped in the face. She had originally planned to let Rongyue Tianlan park the carriage on the street after she arrived at the Nantian clan. She wanted to let everyone in the city see her and know that it was Her Highness Rongyue who sent her back. She wanted to let everyone know that Her Highness Rongyue treated her sincerely and personally drove the carriage for her, but she didn't expect to fall into the Nantian palace as soon as she opened her eyes. Her plan to show off was completely ruined. She glanced at the palace maids and handmaidens around her and felt even more upset. She came back in such a flashy carriage, and only a few people saw it. Besides, Rongyue Tianlan wasn't here. She couldn't show off even if she wanted to. The South Heaven Emperor didn't look very good. Although the Wind Unicorn was unruly and not easy to tame, it was very obedient to its master once it was tamed. He was afraid that as long as Rongyue Tianlan gave a command, this wind beasts would obediently follow his command. There was no need for them to eat and sleep outside to drive the carriage. He did not enter the carriage and even called for a maid to accompany his daughter. She was afraid that it was not out of concern, but to avoid suspicion. What was Her Highness Rongyue thinking? Did he have that kind of interest in her youngest daughter? Now that he had broken off the engagement with the third princess, if he had no interest in Ji Tianyu, then wouldn't the Nantian clan lose everything? The more the South Heaven Emperor thought about it, the more panicked he became. At this time, he finally remembered his third daughter. Oh right, Tianyu, where is your third sister? Originally, Ji Tianyue liked her third sister very much. But after experiencing all this, she didn't like her third sister anymore. Hearing her father's question, she curled her lips and said, she wants to celebrate her master's birthday and return to the Purple Cloud sect. Pausing for a moment, she couldn't help but say, Imperial Father, I didn't expect third sister to be such a loose person, hugging a man in public. This daughter feels that Imperial Father should reprimand her and have her learn some womanly virtues. Otherwise, I'm afraid that our Nantian clan's face will be lost because of her. Although she broke off the engagement with Brother Rongyue and won't marry Brother Rongyue again, she will eventually marry someone else. Chapter 28:34. Although she broke off the engagement with Brother Rongyue and won't marry Brother Rongyue again, she will eventually marry someone else. If her reputation is too bad, I'm afraid she won't be able to find a good family. I'm doing this for her own good, so I couldn't help but report it to father. South Sky King's face sank. If she was really doing this for her sister's good, she should have only reported it to him after entering the palace, and not in such a public place. There were so many eyes watching and ears listening. She was obviously trying to ruin her sister's reputation. South Sky King's eyes were faintly sharp. Tianyu, you need to have a basis for your words. Although your sister grew up outside and is a bit outspoken, she still has a bottom line when doing things. She would never carelessly hug a man. Imperial father believed in her on this point. Don't stay here and listen to those gossips outside. Seeing that father didn't believe her, Ji Tianyu was angry. Father, I saw it with my own eyes. She hugged her master, and she helped her master into the carriage. South Sky King was secretly relieved when he heard her words. When he looked at Ji Tianyu again, his eyes were faintly cold. Her master was injured a while ago, and because of your third sister's matter, he came out of seclusion early and rushed to Misty Mountain to support his disciple. I heard that his health is very poor now, so it's reasonable for him to need someone to help him. He watched your third sister grow up, and a master is like a father. Father's health is not good, so what's wrong with a daughter helping him? Could it be that people will gossip if Imperial Father is sick and needs you to support him? Ji Tianyu was tongue-tied. This, for the first time in his life, South Sky King didn't like this little girl, and his eyes were even colder. Tianyu, your third sister has always been good to you. In this palace, she loves you the most. That year, you had a serious illness and your life was in danger. You urgently needed a rare and fresh medicinal herb as a primer to save you. It was your third sister who ventured alone into that mountain filled with ferocious beasts, found the medicine, and brought it back overnight. She personally watched the imperial physician brew it and fed it to you. Only then was your little life saved. Is this how you repay her? Ji Tianyu's small face turned pale, but she was still somewhat unconvinced. Didn't you say that third sister begged one of her senior brothers to pick this medicine? Why is it that she picked it herself? The South Heaven Emperor sighed. Back then, I didn't believe that your sister had such good martial arts, so I thought that her senior brother had picked it for her. Yesterday, I contacted Sect Master Zi Yun, and he said it himself. It can't be wrong. Ji Tianyue pursed her lips. She knew that her third elder sister used to treat her very well. But, however, because of Brother Rongyu, her third sister seemed to dislike her. Moreover, Ji Tianyue always wanted to belittle her third sister, perhaps because she was fighting for a man. Initially, she was angry when she heard people bad-mouthing her third sister, but now, she couldn't wait for people to badmouth her third sister. She even wanted to step on this elder sister whenever she had the chance. A lot of her words and actions were done subconsciously. She didn't even think about it, right? In her heart, she had always thought that she could let down the world, but the world couldn't let her down. It was natural for her to let down others, but if others let her down, it was unforgivable and should be destroyed by heaven and earth. Chapter 28:35. Therefore, once the sister who loved her the most threatened her interests, she immediately became disgusted in her eyes. Third sister did love me, but there are some things that are unreasonable. Tianyue is also worried about sister. She subconsciously defended herself. South Sky King's face completely sank. You're still quibbling. It's father who indulges you too much, making you unable to distinguish right from wrong. Go back to your own courtyard and reflect on it. South Sky King flicked his sleeves and left. Ji Tianyue, she cried loudly, and her crying was very loud. Naturally, it reached the ears of the South Heaven the Arch who had walked far away. South Sky King didn't come back to coax her because of her crying. He didn't even turn his head. But Ji Tinyue's following words made him stop. Father, are you so angry because you didn't see Brother Rongyu send me back with your own eyes? Do you also want Brother Rongyu to abandon me? South Sky King slightly closed his eyes. He definitely couldn't lose Rongyu Tianlan as his son-in-law. There was already no hope for his third daughter. Was his youngest daughter also going to be lost? No. He definitely couldn't let this matter fall through. He turned around and looked at his daughter who was crying like a pear blossom in the rain. His gaze became complicated. Rongyu Tianlan felt that there was something fishy about this matter, but he couldn't find out what it was. Thinking about it, he suddenly thought of Shinjiuli and his wife. In Jun Liuye's previous life, he was just an ordinary person who didn't even know spells. Naturally, he had never seen Ji Yu's soul. Logically speaking, if Ji Yu was also a reincarnation of someone else's soul and spirit, even if Ji Yu's appearance changed, her soul or spirit would still have the shadow of the original body, and even be no different from the original body. Just like him, Jun Liuye was a reincarnation of his soul. Although Jun Liuye's appearance was different from his, if Jun Liuye's soul was taken out, the soul's appearance would also be like Rongyu Tianlan, and not continue to be like Jun Liuye. If Ji Yu was also like this, then her soul should also be like the original body. And not be exactly like Ji Yu. Then who would her original body be like? Would it be like Ji Xinyu? This last thought was like a raging fire that quickly ignited his blood. He felt that he couldn't wait any longer. He really wanted to return to the Tianxi continent immediately and consult the great god and the others. After all, they had witnessed everything. It would not be easy to return to the heavenly bestowal continent. He would need to pass through the space-time gate multiple times. The amount of telekinesis he would need to expend was not small. Naturally, it would require a lot of stamina. If he was fine, these were all side dishes that he wouldn't care about. However, he was still injured and did not even have half of his psychokinesis left. He needed to rest for a few more days before he could make such a plan. Back then, his back had crashed into a tree, directly breaking a large tree. His back was actually badly injured, but he forced himself to be strong and did not show it. Sending Ji Xinyu to the entrance of the valley and saying that he wanted to leave with her was just an excuse for him to recuperate alone. After Ji Xinyu left, he found a secluded place and checked the injuries on his back. They were more serious than he had imagined. If it was in the past, he had the divine skill to protect his body. Even if the impact was several times stronger than this, it might not be able to hurt him. However, in a situation where he had yet to recover from his injuries, the impact was undoubtedly one disaster after another. There were 3 or 4 large bloody wounds on his back, and fresh blood soaked his entire back robe. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.